What's up guys, this is your favorite fanfic YouTuber, the Fanfic Majesty, and welcome to another amazing video. You can follow me on Patreon for exclusive stories. 4SW Chapter 91, Shichibukai. The magma bombarded down, and a piece of the stairs was instantly melted, burning flames, and thick smoke came out. Sakazuki's eyes narrowed, and he was even more dignified and fearful of the guy who had been his opponent 20 years ago. Whether it is speed, strength, or hockey, physical skills, the other party has already practiced to the ultimate. For a Logia-capable person like him, it is simply a natural nemesis. Logia-capable people have a large attack coverage and strong destructive power, each of which is comparable to a natural disaster, but facing a physique expert, the pressure will be great. Once approached, it is even more troublesome. Especially Jang L, such a strong person who develops his body to the limit. It was just a prelude to the battle, but Sakazuki was already feeling the pressure. Even if he missed the attack, he also lost the trace of Jang L in his eyes. Behind. Suddenly, a strong wind blew. Sakazuki turned around suddenly, and swung out with a punch carrying the lava. Boom! The hot lava splashed around, and the airwaves swept away, and Jang L's fist was blocked. No one will stand still, Jang L. The scene from 20 years ago, unfortunately, you won't see it again. Opening his mouth with a sneer, Sakazuki drew back and swung his fists out one after another. The magma fist, like a torrential rain, instantly covered Jang L's body. I don't know where your blind confidence comes from. But in reality, I will definitely give you a slap in the face. With a faint voice, Jang L's figure flickered, passing between the magma fists and the tiny gaps. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of Akainu, and then his figure flashed. So fast, Sakazuki's eyes narrowed and he raised his head suddenly. A fist enlarged rapidly, carrying a terrifying force, and crashed down. Boom! The dull collision sound came out again, the ground steps were torn apart, and a big pit appeared. Sakazuki's head was blasted into the big pit and turned into magma. The response is very fast, Jang L muttered. Then, he took a step back and stood there, looking up at the front of the headquarters building. Da 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 da. Intensive footsteps sounded at this moment, and in front of the main gate, there were also figures with a gloomy expression and a gloomy expression. That's it. There should be a limit to nonsense. Looking down at the devastated scene on the steps below, Sengoku shouted with an ugly expression. Ha 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 ha. Young people are so angry, this is the headquarters building, and they shot here. Garp laughed and looked at Jang L again. Advertisement. Jang L, you beat these three boys so badly, good for you. Jang L's breath slowly dissipated, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Long time no see, let's learn from each other. Garp laughed again. You be asterisk 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 d. Who are you lying to? This aggressive look doesn't look like a sparring at all. Jang L smiled. It's just to learn from each other. After a pause, he looked at Sakazuki not far in front of him, pulled his head out of the pit, and returned to human form, and said again. Otherwise, they can't still be standing. This sentence came out, and the atmosphere in the room was stagnant again. Sengoku saw that the light in the eyes of the three admiral in front of him was even colder, and he had no choice but to export. Enough. The few of you have just met and can understand your urgency to learn from each other. But also pay attention to the occasion you are in. This is the hallmark of Naval Headquarters Marineford, in front of the headquarters building. It's like this, what's the system? Then, Sengoku looked at Kuzan, Sakazuki, Paluzolino. Call the three of you back to the headquarters, but you still have your own tasks, are you all free? Hearing this, Paluzolino shrugged. Oh, I also remembered, I still have a lot of things to do. So, see you next time, Jang L Admiral. Saying that, he walked swayingly towards the headquarters building. Sleepy. Kuzan returned to his languid look, also stepped on the steps and walked towards the door of the headquarters building again. In a blink of an eye, two of the three admiral had left, leaving only Sakazuki, who was still standing in front of Jang L. I have a very strong hunch, Jang L. Staring at Jang L, Sakazuki said in a deep voice. Oh, Jang L showed a puzzled expression, we will have a real battle soon. Not like this moment, just learning. Sakazuki's eyes were cold, and he bit the word, collaboration, very hard. Yes? Jang L laughed, looking at each other with a look of interest. Then who do you think will win? Sakazuki's eyes narrowed, then turned around, leaving a cold sentence. You'll see. Jang L just smiled and didn't care at all about the declaration of war and provocation hidden in these words. But he also agreed with what the other party said. Not just Sakazuki, but others, Kuzan, Paluzolino, Garp, Sengoku, and more. Between the two sides, I am afraid there will be a real battle. Advertisement, Jang L. When he turned around and was about to leave, Sengoku's voice came from behind. Jang L took a step, then watched Sengoku stepping on the steps, and soon came to him. Shichibukai's participation in the war is of great importance. Next, I will trouble you to take charge of this one. After a pause, Sengoku's expression froze again, and he said solemnly. Of course, these guys are all rebellious people. You can give them a certain shock under appropriate circumstances. Also let them know the strength of our naval headquarters. Jang L was taken aback, then nodded and smiled. I understand what to do, don't worry. In addition, Sengoku spoke again, sighing softly. Don't worry about the three of them, I'll take good care of it. Zhang Lu's expression did not change, but he still smiled. Of course not. That's good. Sengoku breathed a sigh of relief and turned to leave. After standing on the steps for a moment, Zhang Lu suddenly chuckled. The three admirals shot together and staged an interesting exchange with him in front of naval headquarters. This has to be said, very interesting, but also very coincidental. But it is more interesting who arranged or deliberately condoned the coincidence. Shocked. It's boring. That's it. Smiling, Zhang Lu walked away quickly. Anyway, sooner or later we will fight. Behind him, Freya had just recovered from the shock at this moment, and then she ran out shouting with brilliance in her beautiful eyes. Sir Zhang Lu, wait for me. Wait, Freya. At the same time, the three headquarters admiral had arrived in the marshal's office. Among the three, Akainu sat upright, Aokiji found a chair and sat down with his feet on the table, and Kizaru stood in a corner. In front of the headquarters building, shoot at your colleagues without authorization. What the hell are you three doing? Sengoku snapped. The faces of the three were different, but no one answered for a while. Akainu said coldly after a while. It is in the interests of the headquarters that we take action, isn't it? Otherwise, the first time I started, the marshal should have stopped. Sengoku fell silent, then stared at the three seriously. That kind of thing. Next, I don't want any more. Understand? Chapter 92 The arrival of Wuhai inside the marshal's office? As Sengoku's words came out, the atmosphere seemed a little solemn and solemn. The three most powerful headquarters, Marine Admiral, had different expressions, and in the end, it was Kizaru who was the first to speak with a smile. Oh, the face of the marshal is really scary. Don't worry, I will definitely not shoot again. Kuzan didn't respond. The blindfold on his forehead had been pulled down at some point, making a slight snoring sound. Zhang Lu's threat and risk, as a marshal, you should know better than us. Sakazuki stood up and said in a deep voice. The words fell, he turned and walked out of the office, and disappeared in a blink of an eye. Then, Master Marshal, I'm leaving first, I still have a lot of things to deal with. What a busy life, Perusalino said with a smile, his face huddled together. Then, swayed away. Sengoku frowned and glanced again. Aokiji, who was directly asleep in the office, sighed softly. No matter Zhang Lu, or the three in front of you, they are all troublesome guys. Summoning three admiral back to the headquarters, there is a reason to deal with Whitebeard, but also to suppress Zhang Lu. After all, with the return of the next 3,000 elites. In the entire headquarters, the forces under Zhang Lu will jump up in an instant, and the three admiral level, their subordinates are responsible for a unit that belongs to them. In this way, a relative balance can be formed, weakening all of Zhang Lu's own risks. As the supreme commander of the naval headquarters, Marshal Marine, Sengoku also needs to consider the relative balance of the entire system. Before the Armageddon, there must be no accident. Sighing slightly, Sengoku's eyes were solemn. As time passed, the atmosphere of naval headquarters became more and more solemn. Troops from all over the world are gradually gathering here, bringing Marineford's already powerful strength to a new level. Almost every day, officers of all levels can be seen on the square, coming and going. At the inner Gulf port, all kinds of warships are constantly docking, leaving, and alternating. Standing at the office window, Zhang Lu looked down at Marineford Square with a faint smile on his face. He could naturally feel the increasingly serious and tense atmosphere. Naval headquarters is in the process of gathering troops to enrich this marine's largest fortress and most important center. Predictably, the Whitebeard Pirates must do the same. The pirate group under his command is also huge. Advertisement fighting with the largest force among the four emperors, Sengoku attaches great importance to it. This will definitely be a battle to use up all of Marine's combat power, and it will also be a world-class battle that will leave a strong legacy in history. The air in Marineford is full of tension, Zhang Lu exclaimed with a slight smile. Sir, you're saying something that I don't understand again. At this time, Freya walked in with a stack of documents on her high heels. A fragrance wafted over, Zhang Lu turned around and saw this mature and sexy assistant, with a charming smile on his face, sitting on the table with a smile on his face, with Erlang's legs crossed, his right thumb hooked on the high heels, revealing the white feet. Chu Bo's eyes stared at him burningly, offensive, full of it. Zhang Lu sighed inwardly, walked over, glanced at the Bai Nen's long legs and Bai Nen's right foot deliberately exposed by the other party, like an undefended prey attitude. Since the confrontation with San Admiral that day, Freya, who was watching the whole time, has become like this. This also makes Zhang Lu often sigh that in addition to his own job, he has to guard against the seduction of female assistants. The profession of marine is really not easy to do. However, the sake in the officer's family area is delicious. Would you like to try it with me after get off work, sir? Freya giggled and licked her lips. Your signal is too obvious, Freya. I'm not interested in drinking. Zhang Lu shook his head, sat on a chair, and refused directly. Freya will be very happy if a strong man like Sir can be yours. Give me a chance. Freya leaned over the table, revealing those undulating lines, said with a wink. Let's talk about our work. Glancing at each other, Zhang Lu smiled lightly. Speaking of work, and realizing that her seduction failed again, Freya was not disappointed, but turned serious and began to report. Several Wuhai are about to arrive at naval headquarters. It is estimated that today, you will be able to see them. Zhang Lu's eyes flashed, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Really? Then let me see what's coming out of this era. At noon that day, the two sat face to face. Freya dressed up very provocatively, and every move showed the advantages of her figure in front of Zhang Lu. For example, his slender legs and white and tender feet often touched Zhang Lu's trouser legs by accident. Advertisement, in public, Freya, you have to be more reserved. Zhang Lu said helplessly. If it goes on like this, he really doesn't know how long it will last. Don't look at me so bold, sir, but I'm still one. Freya giggled and spit out a word. A hint of surprise flashed in Zhang Lu's eyes. The other person's appearance was not like that at all. Are you more interested in me? I'm very welcome, sir. Eat me tonight? Freya's face flashed a touch of ruddy and said softly. Zhang Lu touched the tip of his nose and was hesitating whether to go out for a drink with him after get off work. At this moment, there was a burst of noise from the door of the restaurant. Those ships, is it them? The famous Wuhai? They actually came too. It's quite a spectacular and shocking scene. Even from a long distance, I can feel that they are all guys who are not easy to deal with. Listening to these discussions, the two of them looked at each other with serious expressions on their faces. Looks like our work is here. Zhang Lu stood up and was about to leave when Freya came over, wiped the corner of his mouth for him, and smiled softly again. Facing Wu Hai, you can't lose your courtesy, sir. After a slight start, Zhang Lu thanked him and strode away. Looking at the figure in front of him, a smile appeared on the corner of Freya's mouth. What a lovely uncle. Inexplicably, I'm more interested in you. During this period of time, she gradually realized that her superior is a very serious guy. In the face of his intentional or unintentional seduction, he is always indifferent. And this, compared with some other old guys, has already won countless times. After all, Naval Headquarters is approaching middle age, but there are also many Lieu general-level officers. By their side, there is no shortage of a female assistant. Meanwhile, Marineford Inner Bay. A coffin boat with a single sail was slowly approaching. The man sitting on it was wearing a black top hat, his eyes were as sharp as eagles, and he carried a black crossed knife on his back. One of Shichibukai, Hawkeye Mahawk. The general-level officer standing in the port's eyes instantly became solemn. These guys who are famous in the world. It's finally here. Chapter 93-7 Warlords of the Sea. Whirring. In the sky of Marineford, a strong wind was blowing, and an inexplicable aura filled the air. Marines with branches everywhere looked towards the inner bay. The 7 Warlords of the Sea are regarded by the world as being tied with Marine, another major organization of pirates, and it is also a legitimate predator launched by the world government to check and balance the sea. Each of these guys is powerful, famous, and status is at the top of the world. Their arrival is naturally attractive enough. Every time the Wuhai meeting, there will be a lot of jumping around. Either, the number of people is not uniform at all, and only a few people participate in the meeting, or these guys will cause a lot of trouble to the officers in charge of reception. This time, what kind of sensation will their arrival cause? No, this is Naval Headquarters, where a large number of Marine elites gather. These guys who were pirates before, how dare they be arrogant here? It is impossible to be an enemy head-on, but a certain limit of provocation and tossing is a matter of course. In Marineford Plaza, the Marines looked at Wu Hai, who arrived first, with flickering eyes, and their hearts became solemn. I didn't expect that the first person to arrive this time would be him. Dracul Mahawk, I heard that he became Wu Hai only after reaching some kind of agreement directly with the 5 elders. This guy has never been interested in the Wu Hai conference. This time, I'm targeting the strongest man in the world, Whitebeard. Even he can't stand loneliness, right? Whispering in a low voice is almost incessant. Zhang Lu was in front, and Freya followed behind, also looking at the Niwon location, while speeding up and walking towards the headquarters building. As time passed, the coffin boat quickly approached the port. When the boat under Mahawk's feet stopped, he slowly stood up, and his hawk-like eyes glanced to the side. Marine, who was stared at by this man, froze all of a sudden, as if he was slashed by a knife, and even his consciousness paused for a few seconds. The impatient lil guy, just step back, the next scene is not something you can handle. With a deep shout, Vice Admiral strode over, wearing a marine coat, with a cigar hanging from his mouth, and a knife at his waist. Then his eyes fixed on Hawkeye, and he said solemnly, Eagle Eye Mahawk, please come with me. After saying this, his eyes turned to the door of justice again. Another ship, belonging to Shichibukai, is also slowly approaching. The second one arrived. After a pause, the Vice Admiral's eyes narrowed. Heavenly Yaksha, Doflamingo. The wind grew louder, ripples rolled up on the surface of the inner bay, and the waves crashed and slapped at the port. Hawkeye Mahawk didn't say a word, and followed the direction Vice Admiral pointed, towards Marineford Square. Advertisement after a distance, naturally there are other people to guide. Hawk-eyed Mahawk's face was calm, he glanced around, his eyes narrowed slightly. The level of defense is a bit stricter than before. Looking back, he asked again, what about that man? Huh? Who are you referring to? The person in charge of the response was a Rear Admiral, who was puzzled after hearing the words. Zhang Lu. Mahawk spat out a name. Zhang Lu Admiral? Rear Admiral's eyes narrowed, then grinned. He's in the headquarters, you'll see him soon. Hawkeye Mahawk nodded, walked across the staggered roads, and headed for the headquarters building. Countless Marines are watching here at this moment, and are also looking at the Gate of Justice. Colonel Prom, that ship is Heavenly Yaksha, Doflamingo. On the city wall, looking down at the ship slowly passing the gate, Marine said in a trembling voice. Well, yeah, it's Doflamingo, Prom said solemnly. Then, he looked at the sea outside the headquarters, and several black spots were also approaching. Shichibukai gathered, all these guys came to the headquarters. However, don't worry, because it is Jang L Admiral who is in charge of receiving them. After a pause, Promi sneered. No matter how capable they are, in front of the adults, they can't make any waves. Then he turned around and drank. Open the door of justice a little wider for me, and don't let the scumbags of the world feel that our marines, timid, are afraid of them. The soldiers on the city wall heard it, mustered their courage, and raised their chests. Yes, sir. The heavy, huge door of justice slowly opened with a whimper, and what caught Marine's eyes in the square was the strange ships that were heading here. Doflamingo is here too. And outside, the captain and empress of the 9 snake pirates, Boa Hancock, the most beautiful woman in the world. Is that the sea hero Jinbe on that boat? Hey, are you really not afraid of sinking into the sea using such strange logs as a boat? Advertisement, that is, the Whitebeard Pirates who replaced the original Sir Crocodile and became Shichibukai. On Marineford Square, one after another shocked words came out, which also revealed the identities of the people who gradually sailed into naval headquarters. Whirring. The flag in front of the headquarters building fluttered and shook with the wind. After that, Wuhai slowly landed on the shore, stepped into the headquarters square, and moved forward under the guidance of special personnel. Da, heavy footsteps sounded, and Wuhai arrived one after another this time, walking down the steps towards the location of the headquarters building. Everyone, please wait a moment in the parlor. Rear Admiral, who was in charge of the response, said in a deep voice. Looking at these world-renowned Wuhai, the pressure in his heart is also very huge. Breakthrough. It's been a long time, but Marineford has become more majestic and majestic. Doflamingo stepped on the steps, glanced around recklessly, and laughed loudly. Behind him, the Empress Boa Hancock is dressed in a cheongsam, showing an elegant and charming body curve, with a light face and a light voice. What a loud guy. Marine, who was stationed on both sides, suddenly widened his eyes and his heart was pounding. Wake up for me. You guys, put away your charms, Hancock. Standing on the high platform, Vice Admiral shouted loudly, his face ugly. It's really embarrassing to actually lose your temper in front of these Wuhai. It's just a bunch of stinky men. I have no interest in them at all. Hancock glanced disdainfully, surrendered to the person under her charm, and said with a sneer. Ah, I can't do it, how can she be so charming? It's so beautiful, you can't extricate yourself just by looking at it. There was chaos in front of the main building. Behind Hancock is Jinbe, who has been silent all the time. He is quietly stepping on the steps, but his eyes are looking for a man. Will he really be there? That, the legendary guy? If it is him, can this war be prevented from happening? Chapter 94. Jinbe knew very well what the purpose of this Wuhai meeting was. Fire Fist Ace's arrest, triggered by his identity, will surely trigger a war that shocks the world. Looking at the current deployment of Marines troops, and the tense and depressed atmosphere in the headquarters, one can also feel the greatly increased military strength. Apparently, naval headquarters has begun to prepare for the onslaught of the Whitebeard Pirates. All the situation has been very clear, the war is imminent. He, who was deeply in awe of Whitebeard, was not optimistic about this war, especially for the Whitebeard Pirates. Once the war breaks out, in this world's first fortress, you will face a large number of the most elite marine forces. Even the strongest man will probably die. Jinbe didn't want Whitebeard to die, so he came here to prevent the war from happening. Behind him, there is a tall, burly, martial teach group silently observing the surrounding. Marine's defense is several times stricter than when we arrived before. I heard that they are gathering elites from all over the world recently. It seems that this is true. The whispered discussion came from behind, and Marshal Teach naturally heard it, and he grinned. Thief, ha 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 ha. Even the guy Zhang Lu was called into the headquarters, which shows how much Marine attaches importance to this battle. It can also be seen that Whitebeard will probably die soon. Saying that, a deep light flashed in Marshal Teach's eyes, and the corners of his mouth grinned even wider. This is good, it is suitable for realizing his plans and ambitions. Captain, that's how you came to naval headquarters. Won't that guy Zhang Lu shoot at you? Badgers asked in a hum. They had seen the horror of that man with their own eyes, and even if they tried their best, it would probably be an extremely difficult battle. Unlike Ace, that man would never be inferior to Whitebeard or other kings of the sea. Thief, ha 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 ha. He asked me to gamble. Then let's come to the headquarters and make a bet with him to see if I am so unlucky. Marshal Teach's eyes flashed, and he said with a laugh. Soon, a group of Wuhai came to the front of the headquarters building and entered it, facing the eyes of many Marines. Faced with the arrival of Wuhai, Marine naturally deployed everything quickly. A splendid, spacious parlor, in every corner of which stands a solemn-looking Marine. Several Wuhai entered in turn, and the living room seemed quiet. Mahawk sat down first, sank into the soft leather sofa, raised his legs, and in front of him was a small table with steaming coffee, sugar and milk on the side, and he could add it himself. Advertisement, breakthrough. Is this the first time I've seen you? Forget it, it doesn't matter, it's just some guys who don't understand the style. Doflamingo glanced around and said with a sneer. Then, he raised the coffee cup on the table and made a slight force with his right hand. Crack. The coffee cup shattered, and the hot coffee ran down his right hand, soon soaking the carpet on the floor. The cups from naval headquarters are really weak. Doflamingo shook his head and sighed, beckoning to Marine beside him. Hey, the cup is broken and the carpet is dirty, help me get another one. The Marine who was called was stunned, then stepped forward nervously, bending over to pick up the ceramic shards on the stall. Suddenly, Doflamingo, who was sitting next to him, made a move with his right hand. The finely shattered ceramic shards on the ground suddenly flew up and instantly reached Marine's neck. The latter froze all over, feeling cold all over his body, and he was only one step away from death. In the room, the expressions of other Marines changed greatly. Don't mess around. Mahawk blew on the coffee he just picked up, his eyes narrowed slightly, watching this scene, and said lightly, "What a bad guy." Blackbeard and the others laughed when they saw this scene. Kill him, kill him," Lafitte shouted, bouncing. The originally quiet living room suddenly became lively. Wu Hai was watching a play, and Marine was trembling nervously. Empress Boa Hancock pouted in disgust. Tui, breakthrough. Doflamingo laughed. A red bloodline had already been cut from the ceramic shards on Marine's neck. Doflamingo, stop your actions now, here, but naval headquarters. There were rapid footsteps at the door, and soon a vice admiral rushed in and shouted loudly. I remember what I said last time, coffee is a drink. I hate it the most. Doflamingo raised his head and suddenly moved his fingers. The expressions of the other Marines in the conference hall changed suddenly, and they screamed in panic. My body is out of control, help, advertisement. Like puppets, the Marines uncontrollably drew their weapons around their waists, all aiming at Vice Admiral at the door. For a moment, Vice Admiral's forehead oozes fine sweat. He glanced at it. Other Wu Hai in the conference hall remained motionless. Some were not paying attention to this scene, some were very interested. Damn. You stop me, Vice Admiral yelled. He had to admit that in the face of such a scene at this time, he had no choice. At the same time, in the marshal's office, this group of scum on the sea is not something that ordinary Marines can handle. After hearing the news from the conference hall, Sengoku frowned. Then, he looked up and asked, Where's Zhang Lu? Where are the others? Compared to Vice Admiral, Zhang Lu would be more effective if he came forward, and he could also handle the scene in the living room. Colonel Zhang Lu is heading to the living room. Marine in front of him said, The headquarters building is not large and the news spreads quickly. On the other side, in the hallway of the living room. Da. Footsteps sounded quickly, and a figure stepped forward with a faint smile, followed by a beautiful woman holding a pile of documents. Colonel Zhang Lu, Day Tiger Admiral. In the passage, all kinds of different titles sounded at this moment, which also caused Wu Hai in the living room to raise their heads involuntarily and look at the door. As the footsteps approached, a gust of wind blew. The next second, a figure wearing a marine coat also caught everyone's eyes. Immediately, the various atmospheres in the living room that had been watching the fun, playing, and not caring about it were instantly broken. Instead, every Wu Hai had a solemn and serious expression on his face. The farce, should it end? Zhang Lu glanced at Doflamingo. His expression remained the same, and he opened his mouth with a faint smile. After all, you really want to kill someone here. I'm afraid there's no way out of Marineford. Doflamingo paused when he heard the words, staring at each other, his sunglasses flashed, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Breakthrough. Perhaps, that's what it is. He retracted his right hand, sat down again, and raised Erlang's legs. Chapter 95. Whirring. Marine, who had escaped from the crisis, rested his hands on the carpet, gasping for breath, looking like he was still in shock. At that moment, he really thought he almost died. In the living room, all the Marines who were controlled to become puppets were also greatly relieved to find that they were able to control their bodies again. But when he looked at Doflamingo again, his eyes were full of fear. Meet again, Mahawk. Looks like you're recovering well. Zhang Lu looked at the cold man sitting there with his legs crossed. The latter raised his head and put the coffee in his hand on the table. Thanks to you, everything is fine. Ha. Zhang Lu smiled, then pointed at Doflamingo. Bring him a cup of coffee. After a pause, he said lightly, If you spill it again, don't drink it. The smile on Doflamingo's face stopped, and he sighed and shook his head. I hate drinking coffee the most. Especially the coffee at naval headquarters. Zhang Lu ignored him, but fixed his eyes on Marshal Teach, who had been quiet since he came in, and grinned suddenly. I'm glad you came, Teach. With that said, he stepped inside. Marshal Teach also laughed when he heard the words, Thief ha. This is naval headquarters, Marineford, and Zhang Lu Admiral, who should be in charge of Wu Hai now? Under such circumstances, it seems inappropriate to do something to us. As he spoke, his tone froze again. I'm going to gamble. Zhang Lu's expression did not change. With a smile on the corner of his mouth, he quickly came to the other side. Everyone present turned their eyes and looked here, wondering what kind of story there is between the two. Your life is hard, Teach, even me, I was surprised by you. Zhang Lu sighed with a smile and stood in front of Marshal Teach. A powerful pressure suddenly rushed towards Blackbeard and the Badgers, Vanoka, Lafitte and others behind him, making them goosebumps all over their bodies. Thief ha. Yes. Marshal Teach was stared at by the other party, and fine sweat was oozing from his forehead. But it's a pity. Zhang Lu suddenly shook his head and sighed. Marshal Teach's pupils shrank, and then he saw the other's big hand approaching quickly, grabbing his forehead and head. You bet wrong. Cold. Senhan's voice came to his ears, and Marshal Teach was cold all over. Captain Teach. The exclamations of Vanoka and others came from behind. Marshal Teach's vision changed rapidly, and then there was a crashing sound. After waiting for everyone in the living room to react, he saw Zhang Lu's right hand was pressing on Marshal Teach's head. Advertisement as for this new Wu Hai, his head was deeply embedded in the wall behind him. Cracks like spider webs spread around, and a pothole emerged. Blood flowed from Marshal Teach's nostrils, forehead, and back of head, and soon dripped onto the ground, staining the carpet red. "You're bold, Teach, how dare you appear in front of my eyes? I don't know what to do, do you really think I dare not kill you?" Sen Ran's voice came to his ears. Zhang Lu's voice was very cold. "Betting in front of me, do you know who controls the winner or loser in your so-called gambling game?" Marshal Teach's pupils contracted, and he suddenly grinned, with scarlet blood in his mouth. "Thief, ha 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 ha. Zhang Lu, I've never been able to figure out one thing. That is, why did you always want to kill me from the first time you saw me?" Zhang Lu's eyes narrowed, looking down at Marshal Teach who was sitting in front of him, and then spit out an unbelievable sentence. "Who knows? Who knows?" Not only was Marshal Teach stunned, everyone else present was stunned. Unexplained pursuit, hatred? This is really outrageous. Doflamingo burst out laughing, looking at Zhang Lu with inexplicable eyes. "Fu yi yi yi. It's fun, there is such an interesting guy in Marine." At the same time, he was also laughing inwardly, as expected of Zhang Lu uncle. Go deep into the naval headquarters to join this world-famous war and take charge of the very important part of Shichibukai. Then, when the war breaks out, shock the entire Marine, the world. It's a pretty good plan. Presumably by then, whether it is the world, Marine, or pirates, they will be dumbfounded. Breakthrough. Hey, Teach, I bet you'll be alive. He grinned again at the bloody Teach. Marshal Teach raised his head and grinned as well. "I bet I won't die here." Then, his eyes fixed on Zhang Lu. "Zhang Lu, will you kill me?" Zhang Lu's face sank and stared at each other. He doesn't care about Doflamingo's acting behavior. The two are one family, but Blackbeard in front of him dares to provoke him? Where does the courage come from? Won't. You should celebrate, Teach, you got it right. Compared to your life and death, the next thing is more important. Zhang Lu said lightly. "Thief, ha 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 ha." Marshal Teach laughed. However, before he could finish laughing this time, one foot was kicked over again, causing his complexion to change suddenly. Advertisement, boom. The entire living room was shaken, debris flying. Marshal Teach's head was embedded in the wall again, blood splashed, and a big pit appeared. "Captain." Lafitte and others exclaimed again, looking at Zhang Lu in front of him, fearful and angry. "Although I can't kill you, I can beat you a few times. So, it's too early for you to be happy, Teach," Zhang Lu said lightly, retracting his right foot. Marshal Teach leaned back against the wall, his face was a little distorted, and there was endless anger in his eyes. "Thief, ha 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 ha. Zhang Lu. I understand." Zhang Lu ignored Marshal Teach, but turned around and found a place to sit down slowly, scanning the 5 Wu Hai in front of him. "Nonsense, I won't say more. The purpose of calling you here is also very simple, and it is not a secret. I believe everyone here knows it. No matter what purpose you come with, there is only one choice left." After a pause, Zhang Lu snorted lightly, "That is, join this war against the Whitebeard Pirates. This is a mandatory call, so you don't have any right to refuse. Otherwise," after scanning his eyes for a while, Zhang Lu said softly. "The ministry also has the right to take corresponding punitive measures against you." Marshal Teach swayed and sat on the chair, wiping the blood from the corner of his mouth, his face still smiling. It seems that he doesn't mind the beating just now. Doflamingo watched him a few times, his eyes narrowed. Such a guy has a very deep city and is naturally terrifying. The potential of a hero. Not easy guy. Muttering, he seemed to know why Zhang Lu cared so much about the other party and made a move. Today is just a reception. The specific matters will be discussed in detail later when Wu Hai arrives. When the meeting is held, I will describe it in detail. Then, next, I wish you a happy stay in this headquarters. Zhang Lu said casually and ended the meeting with a few words. Its relaxed harmony, as well as the suppression of the 5 Wu Hai, is something no other Marine has ever seen. With Zhang Lu's departure, the atmosphere in the living room seemed depressed. Doflamingo stood up, came to Marshal Teach, and grinned suddenly. "Is that enough, Blackbeard, Marshal Teach?" Marshal Teach heard the words, his eyes narrowed, and he stared at each other. After a while, he smiled naively. "What can I do if I can't bear it? I can't beat him." Hearing the words, Doflamingo shook his head, turned and left, leaving only a vague word floating in the air. "Perhaps, you can consider working with me." Chapter 96 Jinbe's Request. "Captain." The words floating in the air were heard by the Blackbeard Pirates, and they all looked at Marshal Teach who was sitting there. The latter's eyes flashed slightly, then smiled, and thoughtfully said, "Do you cooperate?" "What an interesting proposition." Van Oka's eyes narrowed slightly, he also seems to be hostile to Zhang Lu. "Want to talk to him?" Lafitte whispered. Marshal Teach was silent for a moment, and after thinking for a moment, a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. "It's not the time yet. And we can't tell which side the guy is standing on." After a pause, he sighed again. The muddy water at naval headquarters this time is not so good. Everyone in Wuhai has their own purpose. Slowly standing up, Marshal Teach smiled, looking at the others who left the living room in turn, and smiled again. "But that's more fun." At the same time, Zhang Lu, who left the living room to his office, also welcomed a guest. "Seaman Jinbe. Why did you come to visit me by following me on purpose?" Zhang Lu sat on a chair, leaning back on the chair, his eyes fixed on the man at the door, and he asked with a smile. Freya didn't say anything, and also looked at Jinbe. Zhang Lu, Admiral, I want to talk to you. Jinbe took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, his face solemn and serious. Oh. Zhang Lu raised his eyebrows and looked at the passageway where people came and went. Then, come in and talk. Jinbe's eyes brightened. Thank you. Then, he stepped into the office one step, and turned around to close the door tightly. The noisy sound in the passage suddenly became quiet, and the sound insulation of Marine's office was indeed quite good. After taking the tea from Freya, Zhang Lu blew on it, took a sip, felt a little hot, frowned and put it down, then looked at Jinbe in front of him again. He had an impression of this fish man who seemed a little restrained and nervous at this time. After Fisher Tiger, the second captain of the Sun Pirates was even known as a seaman. At the same time, in the battle with the four emperors Big Mum 2 years later in the original book, he uttered an impressive sentence. Well, just Jinbe of the four emperors, advertisement. A heroic, confident, and chivalrous Mr. Murloc. Then, Mr. Jinbe, let's talk. What else do you want to tell me? Zhang Lu said with a smile. You should know better than me about the current state of the world. Fire Fist Ace's arrest, Naval Headquarters series of actions. It will mean the coming of war. The Whitebeard Pirates will never look down on their brothers. If they are arrested like this, they will definitely take action. And once Whitebeard gets angry and fights Marine, it will cause a huge stir, and it will even affect the entire world. Jinbe said in a deep voice. In war, there is bound to be death. Both Marines and pirates will suffer heavy losses. After a light meal, Jinbe raised his head and stared at Zhang Lu. I have always heard your rumors, and all your deeds have explained chivalry and justice to the fullest. Jinbe was very pleasantly surprised to hear that you presided over this Wuhai meeting. He also believed that only by turning to you can there be a result. Hearing these words, Zhang Lu naturally understood what the other party meant. You want me to stop this war? Frowning, Zhang Lu asked in a deep voice. Yes, if it were you, it would surely make Naval Headquarters stop this war. Jinbe nodded. This really bothers me, Jinbe. As Shichibukai, I didn't expect you to say such words in front of me. Zhang Lu sighed softly, then he looked at each other. The purpose of my presiding over the Wuhai meeting is to make you, Wuhai, also participate in the war against Whitebeard. The Naval Headquarters is doing everything in its power to win this war. Sighing slightly, Zhang Lu shook his head. I'm sorry to disappoint you, Jinbe. This war is not something I, as a colonel, can stop or influence. Jinbe's body shook and fell silent, then his body moved and slowly knelt down in front of Zhang Lu. Freya's complexion changed slightly, Zhang Lu's eyes were condensed, and he was also moved. Please, in the world, only you have the power to prevent this cold wave and that war from happening. Jinbe said in a deep voice. Can you give up your dignity in order to stop this war, Jinbe? Zhang Lu took a deep breath and said solemnly. It is very relevant, even if it is dignity, what is it in the face of endless death and war? Advertisement, Jinbe said loudly, her forehead pressed against the ground. Zhang Lu was silent, he deeply felt the firm determination of the Shichibukai in front of him. After a long time, he still shook his head. Sorry, Jinbe, I didn't lie to you, now I don't have the ability to prevent this war from happening. You should also feel the determination of the world government and Marine. Ace has already become the fuse of this war, and Marine's ambition to extinguish the fire of pirates in this era must not be underestimated. Jinbe's body trembled. Is that so? Still thank you for allowing me to say this? Get up, Jinbe, I respect you as well. Zhang Lu sighed softly. What will the future world, the world's situation, look like in the end? Neither you nor I can predict. Maybe you should be more optimistic. Staring at the other's raised face with both eyes, Zhang Lu said softly, as if meaningful. Perhaps it will develop in a positive direction, maybe. Hearing this, Jinbe was stunned for a moment, then looked puzzled and slowly stood up. Then, I'll say goodbye first, Zhang Lu, Admiral. Zhang Lu nodded. The door creaked open, and Jinbe's figure quickly disappeared. Looking at the other person's back, Zhang Lu fell silent and his eyes became deep. He knew very well that the next seaman would refuse the mandatory summoning of Naval Headquarters, and strongly opposed the occurrence of this war, so he was sent to impel down. After a long while, Zhang Lu asked aloud, Bartholomew Bear, why didn't you come today? He went to Gecko Moria with the task of world government. It seems that he was to tell the other party the news of the replacement of Shin Wuhai. Freya responded. Yes, Zhang Lu nodded lightly. Wuhai meeting. Wait for everyone to arrive before holding it. Then he stood up and walked to the window. The breeze blew and ruffled his robes. The wind in Marineford is getting bigger, muttering. A light flashed in Zhang Lu's eyes. Chapter 97 joined forces to deal with Zhang Lu. With the arrival of Marines from all over the world, Marineford was more heavily defended. Today's headquarters building, in the square, officers can be seen almost everywhere. In the upcoming battle, Marine, who is below the school level, is not even qualified to participate. From this, it can be seen that the intensity and scale of this war will be unprecedented. 3 days later, has Moria been defeated by Straw Hat Luffy? There was a smile on Zhang Lu's mouth, but his expression was not surprised at all. Yes, it's really surprising. Since he went to sea, Luffy, the Straw Hat Boy, has defeated Sir Crocodile and Gecko Moria and Shichibukai one after another. With such strength, among this batch of pirate supernovas, I am afraid they will be extremely outstanding. Also, he just made a big noise at the Eni's lobby, causing a worldwide event. Freya said with a surprised expression. With other pirate groups, there are already rumors in the world that these supernovas are called the extremely evil generation. Hearing the words of his female assistant, Zhang Lu couldn't help laughing. A very evil generation? What an interesting name. I can't help but want to see them, how capable they are. Freya laughed when she heard the words. Sir, if you want to meet, there will definitely be a chance. I also think there is a chance. Zhang Lu nodded. But for now, let's get rid of the Shichibukai guys first. They should have been waiting very anxiously. Freya looked at the documents on the table and smiled softly. The other two Shichibukai will come to the headquarters soon. Zhang Lu nodded. After the Wuhai meeting, he was able to visit Ace. Today's Ace should be very depressed, at the darkest and lowest point in her life. At this time, it is more necessary for family members to accompany you. With a light sigh, Zhang Lu suddenly felt that life in naval headquarters was a bit difficult. On the other side, in the room where Doflamingo lived. Looking at the tall and burly man in front of him who was missing a few front teeth, Brother Doflaming raised his head and grinned. Did you figure it out, Teach? Marshal Teach's eyes narrowed slightly. I need to know how to cooperate between you and me? Brother Doflamingo leaned back on the sofa, and a light flashed on his sunglasses. How else can we cooperate? Whether it's you or me, should you hate Zhang Lu? And after this war starts, it's our chance. Such frank and direct words made Marshal Teach stunned. So, you really want to deal with Zhang Lu? His eyes narrowed, Blackbeard asked in a deep voice. Advertisement, breakthrough. Such stupid words shouldn't come out of your mouth, Teach. The first time I saw you, I saw that monstrous ambition in your eyes. A guy like you should have a clear understanding of the situation or what to do next. Doflamingo laughed. Then, let's reach a preliminary agreement. After a long silence, Marshal Teach stretched out his right hand and said in a deep voice. It would be beneficial to him to have one more helper to deal with Zhang Lu together, and he was naturally so happy. Moreover, the strength of this guy Doflamingo is not weak. In the future, it should also be able to use the other party. Breakthrough. Then, from today onwards, we are allies. Teach. Doflamingo smiled. Two hands in the air, tightly clasped together. Eventually, Marshal Teach left. Brother Doflamingo looked at the slowly closing door and let out a low laugh. You have so many enemies, Zhang Lu uncle. In the blink of an eye, another 3 days passed. On this day, the remaining two Shichibukai arrived at Naval Headquarters Marineford. It also means that the important Wuhai meeting will be held today. In the office, Freya was nervous, sorting documents and speaking to Zhang Lu, who was sitting there holding a teacup with a relaxed expression. Sir, all the manuscripts you need for the meeting have been prepared. I heard that this meeting will be broadcast live and spread to the world government. So, you still have to have dessert. Zhang Lu smiled, but waved his hand and said, only the 5 old guys watched. However, a hypocritical, meaningless catwalk, just walking the form. Freya is helpless, and she has been looking around for information about this officer's past recently. After learning about it, I was also shocked and adored. She did not expect that such a big man would one day become her superior. But in the same way, as they got along, Zhang Lu's casualness and the direct critical words of the world government to Marine's interior also made her feel uneasy. For example, at this time, the 5 old guys mentioned by the other party, Freya of course knew who they were describing, but she did not dare to talk to them. You are so bold. Sighing, Freya had no choice but to put the manuscript in front of Zhang Lu. Check again. Zhang Lu waved his hand. No need, I believe in your ability to work. I appreciate your trust. Freya rolled her eyes, and suddenly felt that she had worked so hard and had no achievement at all. Advertisement. The two were chatting, when a figure suddenly appeared at the door. Brother Doflamingo. Freya's expression changed slightly and she cried out. Breakthrough. A very harmonious working atmosphere. While smiling, Doflamingo stared at Freya and walked in. Woo, the Wuhai meeting hasn't started yet. Freya's scalp was numb, she subconsciously stood behind Zhang Lu and said in a trembling voice. Breakthrough. Brother Doflaming smiled, his eyes turned to Zhang Lu again. Freya. Zhang Lu suddenly exclaimed, Sir, Freya Kaido. Go and see how the conference hall is prepared. Zhang Lu said. Yes. Freya nodded quickly and ran out. Come here suddenly, do you have anything to say? Zhang Lu raised his head, looked at Brother Doflamingo, and asked with a light smile. The latter nodded, raised his right hand slightly, and the door closed with a creak. It's not a big deal, but I suddenly found out that you have a lot of enemies. Doflamingo smiled. Oh? Zhang Lu showed a puzzled expression. The meeting is about to start, so let's keep it short. Dover. Brother Doflaming didn't intend to be long-winded and said with a smile. Marshal Teach came to me. I want to join forces with me and take action against you. Zhang Lu raised his eyebrows, his expression unchanged. So, what are you going to do? I think that's when. I shot him from behind, it should be more interesting. What do you think? Brother Doflamingo was talking and laughing even more happily. Chapter 98 Wuhai Meeting. That's really bad fun, Dover. After a while, Zhang Lu shook his head and said. Wah 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 yang yang, how interesting, I thought it was my own, but in the end, I found out that it was an enemy. Doflamingo laughed. You won't come to the end and stand on the opposite side of me, will you? Zhang Lu smiled, with a casual tone. Of course not, Zhang Lu uncle. This kind of joke is unacceptable. Brother Doflamingo's expression changed slightly, and he said quickly. Haha, just kidding. Get ready, it's time for the Wuhai meeting to start. Zhang Lu said with a smile, also stood up and picked up the documents on the table. Then, I'll go first. Brother Doflamingo hooked his right hand, the door creaked open, and then swayed and quickly disappeared. Ha ha, Zhang Lu just stood there and suddenly smiled. For Doflamingo, he naturally would not doubt anything. Not to mention the relationship between the two after an hour, but to talk about the interests of standing together just now. The other party will never make any wrong choice. Only those who truly know him will know more clearly the correctness of standing with him. After flipping through the documents on the table, Zhang Lu narrowed his eyes, picked it up, and walked out of the office. After half an hour, in the spacious conference hall, there are surveillance phone bugs who are looking around curiously, showing everything in it to the people on the other end. Above the head are brilliant and gorgeous crystal lamps, and the long conference table is covered with a solemn dark red long cloth. The overall layout of the room is generous, solemn, and solemn. In each of the four corners is a schoolmaster with a serious face and a straight body. Obviously, Naval Headquarters pays special attention to these famous Shichibukai on the sea. The so-called Wuhai meeting is not only a meeting forcing these people to participate in the battle, but also a routine inspection in the eyes of some people. Breakthrough. Live broadcast. Who is the opposite of a surveillance phone bug? Brother Doflamingo sat on a chair and turned his head to look at the surveillance phone bug placed not far away. There was a chair on one side, sitting with a bandage all over his body, a strangely shaped man, sitting there with a gloomy breath and not saying a word. On the opposite side, Hawkeye Mahawk, not far from the other side, are the Empresses Hancock and Jinbe. And in the corner of the table, sits Blackbeard Marshal Teach. It must be a great person, otherwise, such a meeting is not something that ordinary people can monitor. Advertisement. Blackbeard grinned. You wouldn't want to know, Doflamingo. Suddenly, the cold man who was holding a Bible in his hand raised his head and said something. Oh, Bear, you know? Brother Doflamingo's eyes moved slightly. The one who spoke was actually the tyrant Bartholomew Bear, who never spoke, which was beyond his expectations. Lenovo who held this meeting, you should guess. Bear said lightly. Brother Doflamingo was slightly startled, then his eyes changed, and finally he fell silent. It was Zhang Lu who held the meeting, and of course he knew what he was doing. Compared with Shichibukai, Zhang Lu, who is now Marine, has attracted some people's attention. The five old men. It's really fun. Muttering, Brother Doflaming also fell silent. This is a solemn and serious occasion, and no one is willing to speak. The existence of surveillance phone bugs also made the 7 people present even more lazy to speak. The atmosphere in the conference hall has also become extraordinarily solemn because of the existence of the phone bug. Da 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 da, until a certain moment, a slow and rhythmic voice sounded outside the conference hall, and the 7 people present raised their heads and looked at the door. Have you all arrived? That couldn't be better. Zhang Lu strode into the conference hall, glanced at the audience, and said with a smile. Then, his eyes were fixed on one of them again. Moria, I heard you lost to Straw Hat Luffy. It's really disappointing for an old pirate like you to lose to a newcomer. Can we think that you have lost the qualification to continue to hold the position of Wuhai? The words with a smile were extraordinarily sharp, which immediately changed the expressions of those present. Moria raised her head sharply and looked at Zhang Lu. It was just a mistake. My strength is not discounted at all. Saying that, he gritted his teeth sharply. If I meet that guy again, I will never lose to him. Zhang Lu smiled. The weak are used to finding various excuses for their failures. I heard that you fought against that kid Kaido 20 years ago, but suffered a tragic defeat. You look like this now, it seems that you have fallen. Hearing the words Kaido, Moria shuddered and became even more excited. Shut up. Advertisement, I didn't. I will definitely get my revenge, I swear. I will definitely take revenge. Zhang Lu stood at one end of the long table, put the document in his hand on the table, and smiled faintly. I have no interest in your revenge. Today, the purpose of calling everyone here is just to deal with the next big battle. For everyone here, I have some impressions, and some are not familiar with, or, go further. I don't even understand the significance of the establishment of the Wuhai organization. This sentence caused some Marines present to change color slightly. Several Wuhai were even more stunned and stunned. According to my personal opinion, it is a very ridiculous way for the world government to invite you scumbags in the sea to deal with pirates. Zhang Lu's next sentence made all Wuhai's eyes widen. Then, he glanced at the surveillance phone bug and grinned again. Well, even if you 5 old guys are here watching, staring at me, I'm still going to say that. Brother Doflamingo laughed. Boa Hancock's beautiful eyes twinkled brightly, and Jinbe's eyes seemed to flash with excitement. Blackbeard Marshal Teach grinned, and the corner of Mahawk's mouth curled. Bartholomew Bear raised his head and looked at the man in front of him seriously. Gecko Moria sneered. Dare to say it, he clearly knows who is monitoring the person here, but he is still so targeted. Of course, I also understand. The so-called Shichibukai is just a compromise formed for the sake of profit or some purpose. You got what you wanted, and the world government also gave you convenience. Then, now, it's your time to pay. Next, Marine will wage an all-out war against Whitebeard. And you must join in on the coming Whitebeard with Marine. After a pause, Zhang Lu glanced at everyone and became sharp. Everyone present, there is no right to refuse. In an instant, the hall became silent. An inexplicable depressing breath covered everyone. I refuse to participate in this war. Suddenly, a voice came out. Zhang Lu's eyes moved slightly. It was Jinbe. I'm willing to suffer the consequences. Jinbei's face was calm and his tone was firm. It is good. Zhang Lu nodded. Chapter 99. Being a Shichibukai and not fulfilling the consequences of being forcibly summoned would be serious. As a pirate, once deprived of Wuhai's identity and placed in the naval headquarters, the fate of welcoming Jinbe is already obvious. Everyone here, what else do you want to say? Zhang Lu's face was calm, and after scanning everyone around, he said lightly. Regarding Jinbei's reaction, he had already anticipated it, and he knew exactly what the opponent would end up next. When will the war happen? Mahawk asked in a deep voice. The specific time has not yet been determined, but the headquarters will notify you in advance. Until then, you are still free. Zhang Lu spoke up. You can choose to live in the headquarters and wait, or you can return to your own territory and wait for the headquarters call. No one said anything, and the conference hall fell silent. Since there are no more problems, the meeting is over. Zhang Lu said. He is not a person who likes to be long-winded, and with these guys in front of him, especially when he has eyes on him, he really doesn't have much to say. Then, Zhang Lu turned around and left. Breakthrough. A brave man, Jinbe. Hopefully we will meet again in the future. Doflamingo stood up and stared at the silent Murloc sitting there. The other Wuhai walked out of the conference hall. Some planned to stay here, while others left the headquarters on the same day and returned to their own territory. Naval headquarters is really not a place to give them a sense of security for those who have negotiated a compromise with the world government. Jinbe sat there quietly and did not respond when she heard the words. Thief, ha 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 ha. There are pirates like you in the world, it's wonderful. Marshal Teach laughed. The conference hall was soon empty. After Bartholomew Shong left, it became quiet. Jinbe sat there still motionless. He had realized something and was waiting. Suddenly, several figures appeared at the door, headed by a serious-looking Vice Admiral. Hi Sha Jinbe, because you refused the headquarters call, your Wuhai identity was also deprived at the same time. Please come with us. Don't think about resistance. You should know exactly where this place is. Vice Admiral said in a deep voice, shackles in his hands, rattling as he walked. I see. Advertisement. Jinbe raised his head and said in a deep voice. A moment later, Qian Wuhai, who resisted the forced summons, was escorted from naval headquarters in shackles and sent to the world's largest prison, impelled down. At the same time, Zhang Lu has also received Ace's information. Are you imprisoned in the headquarters for the time being? He raised his eyebrows in surprise. Yes, however, Marshal Sengoku also ordered that after you meet Fire Fist Ace, we will send him to impel down. The school official who came to deliver the letters said with a smile. Yes? Zhang Lu's eyes flashed slightly and nodded. Then please take me to the headquarters prison. Colonel Zhang Lu is very kind, the officer said with a smile. The two walked towards the headquarters prison one after the other. On the other side, in Marijoy, the five old men who witnessed the entire Wuhai meeting did not speak to each other, and the palace also seemed to be quiet. What do you think? After returning to the headquarters again, Zhang Lu seems to be very obedient. He has neither expressed his resistance to the ensuing war nor his previous dissatisfaction. The old voice sounded, and the words were full of playfulness. The five of you and I all know that this guy is a deep-minded person. The calmer the surface, the more boiling the volcano buried in his heart. He's hiding his purpose. Sengoku recalls him to the headquarters to deal with Whitebeard, which will inevitably lead to disaster. Someone said coldly. Maybe, this guy's combat power, even we have to admire. He's really the best man for Whitebeard. Also, it's really not easy to kill, otherwise there would be no compromises like 20 years ago. Another voice sounded. It's just a relationship of mutual use. After this war, no matter what he has in mind, we must take action to deal with him. In the end, after the cold voice, the expressions of the five people in the palace flashed. It's a good plan. He's too dangerous for Marine and for the world. Dispose of it as the best solution. Only, after a pause, the old voice became deep and solemn. Advertisement. If you want to get rid of him, it may cost a lot. Then please move that guy. The heritage of world government is not something that Zhang Lu can compete with. He is not the four emperors, nor is he a Shichibukai with outstanding power. Only alone. The sound gradually became smaller and then disappeared. Five old men standing at the top of the world are carrying out a calm, cold assassination plan. Naval headquarters, the gate of the prison. Zhang Lu followed the officer in front and walked quickly. Compared to other places, the defense here is obviously stricter, although the main prison is only a transit prison to impel down. But since important figures like Wokuan Ace are imprisoned, they will definitely be taken seriously. Fire Fist Ace is imprisoned in it. You can see him when you go in. The officer said with a smile. Okay, thank you. Zhang Lu nodded and smiled. The jailer guarding the gate also let go of his defense after being summoned, and Zhang Lu quickly entered. The prison cage in the headquarters is not many prisoners, and it looks very empty. Because of this, Zhang Lu quickly found Ace, who was sitting cross-legged with his head down. The Fire Fist Ace at this time was undoubtedly confused and desperate. Defeated by his subordinate Marshal Teach, and sent to naval headquarters, what will be waiting for him? He didn't even know it himself, but faintly, he already had a bad premonition. Dad, Marco, you must not come to save me. Ace's heart was trembling. Suddenly, slight footsteps sounded, and Ace's body trembled slightly, but he ignored it. Although the place is empty, other prisoners are occasionally brought in. Although his cage is independent, it is not special. Marine is loose on the outside and tight on the inside, with a lot of covert defense. At the same time, this is naval headquarters, and he is not too worried that he will escape. But soon, the footsteps got closer and closer until they came to him, and then stopped. Ace. The familiar voice made Ace's body tremble and his heart trembled. I said earlier, you will lose to Marshal Teach. Look, it's still like this after all. Such words reminded him instantly who the owner of the voice was, and suddenly raised his head. You are? Uncle, chapter 100. They're all my subordinates. Standing outside the cage, that smiling, short-haired man with a knife on his waist, who wasn't Zhang Lu who called himself his uncle before. How will you be here? Ace said in shock, first a Marine. Zhang Lu smiled lightly. Marine? Ace was taken aback. Garp, you really didn't tell you any of my information. Zhang Lu sighed softly, then he sat down with his knees crossed. Let's talk about you first, Ace. Referring to himself, Ace lowered his head. I have nothing to talk about, it's already like this. You shouldn't have come to save me, right? Zhang Lu nodded. For now, I really can't save you. Marine is going to use you, bring Whitebeard forward, and start a full-scale war. The purpose is to destroy the Whitebeard Pirates who are now standing at the head of the 4 emperors, in order to weaken the ever-expanding form of the Great Pirate Era. In this way, it also warns those with great ambitions to go to the sea. After a pause, Zhang Lu stared at Ace. That is to say, Ace, you have become the trigger for this war. It was your defeat with Marshal Teach that sparked this unprecedented war. The words echoed in the prison, the torches on both sides flickered and sizzled, and Ace lowered his head, hanging even lower. It was my fault. Is there any way to stop this war from happening, Uncle? Zhang Lu shook his head. This has become the general trend of the world. Now, both Marine and the Whitebeard Pirates are fully preparing for the battle. This war is unavoidable, and you, after a slight pause, Zhang Lu's tone became low. It will also be the victim of this war. Ace suddenly raised his head and took a deep breath. My life and death are not important, but it shouldn't involve my father and others. Marine can execute me, but it shouldn't affect the Whitebeard Pirates. Zhang Lu sighed softly. It seems that you don't quite understand your situation, Ace. Your life and death are no longer in your hands. Ace said anxiously. To stop this war, I am willing to die. Since you are Marine, there must be a way. Hearing this, Zhang Lu suddenly laughed. Ha 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 ha. This burst of laughter made Ace froze there. Advertisement. After experiencing such a thing, are you still so naive, my stupid nephew? You don't seem to understand the world yet. The voice became low and serious. The death of One Piece brother D. Roger has triggered a more drastic change in the times, and the era of the Great Pirate has come. Because of what he said during his lifetime, people in the world are rushing to run and become pirates, and because of this, the times have run wild. Marine is gradually unable to control the situation of this sea, and the new world has become a paradise for the so-called 4 emperors. When the time reaches this moment, your arrest also happens to be Marine's best chance to deal with the Whitebeard Pirates and cool down this rampant era. Do you understand it? Ace froze all over, and his face became extremely ugly. It can be said that you are the breakthrough point at which the times are about to turn, but it can also be said that you are insignificant in it. Faced with the change of the general trend, all personal actions will lose their meaning. Zhang Lu sighed softly. Whether you die or not, it has no effect on this war. So, live your life, Ace. After a pause, Zhang Lu stared at each other. Only by living can there be hope. Ace looked complicated. Is there still hope for me? You haven't seen Roger. Never see him again, but, your mother, my sister, Rouge. Don't you want to see her? Zhang Lu said softly. Mother. Ace was startled, then gritted his teeth. But she was not the one. Having said that, Ace stopped, but both of them understood the meaning. Everything is arranged by me, you just stay here. Hope, as long as it exists, there will be, Ace. Zhang Lu said meaningfully. After speaking, he slowly stood up and smiled again. It's really embarrassing, Ace, like this, live well. In the voice of the words, Zhang Lu turned around and walked out of the prison. Even your dad, the so-called Grandpa Garp, doesn't work anymore. You still have an uncle who loves you the most and who gave everything for you back then. Because, advertisement, you are my relatives in this world, not many. The voice gradually weakened, and Ace watched the figure slowly move away with complicated eyes. Uncle. Muttering, a smile suddenly appeared on Ace's face. You don't have to do so much for me at all. Anyway, I'm the damned person. However, having a relative like you really makes me feel warmer before dying. If I die, please help me take care of my brother. His name is Luffy. Zhang Lu's figure was already at the door, but he heard everything Ace said, raised his hand and waved it. Zhang Lu heard the news the day after he left the prison. Fire Fist Ace was sent to impel down. The person responsible for escorting him is Garp Vice Admiral. Freya looked at her superior curiously and reported this information. After I saw it, I adjusted it immediately. Some people in this department are really afraid of me. Zhang Lu smiled and shook his head. I'm curious why you pay so much attention to Fire Fist Ace. As far as I know, he seems to be the captain of the 2nd Division of the Whitebeard Pirates. Freya asked suspiciously. He is a pirate and also my nephew. Zhang Lu said lightly. What? Freya opened her mouth in astonishment. He turned out to be your nephew? That sir, can you tolerate Fire Fist Ace being executed next? Freya asked again in surprise. If this kind of thing doesn't reach our eyes, who would know? If you can tolerate it, let's try it first. Zhang Lu grinned, then raised his head, his eyes fixed on the female assistant in front of him. In an instant, Freya felt a sharp breath lock her and she was speechless for a while. Obviously, the topic of Fire Fist Ace is extremely sensitive to the commander. Maybe, you should pay more attention to the news I told you to inquire about. When the words fell, Freya felt the breath gradually dissipating, took a deep breath and said, I've been paying attention to the Marines you asked me to pay attention to. They should, and will arrive at the headquarters soon. But these people are either base commanders from all over the world, or general-level officers who are not under the control of the headquarters. What is your purpose of paying attention to them? When Zhang Lu heard the words, the corners of his mouth curved slightly, and he said with a light smile. They used to be my subordinates. Freya was stunned, and then her heart was churning. Chapter 101 It's all here. Standing up slowly, Zhang Lu came to the window and looked down at Marineford ahead. The wide square, the calm inner bay, the huge gate of justice, standing here can clearly see all the scenes of the headquarters. It's all here. Muttering, Zhang Lu's eyes also appeared one after another. That year, the recruits were very young and immature. But under his leadership, it became a sharp knife to suppress pirates in naval headquarters. The seas they have visited are countless, and the civilians they have saved are countless. Among them, naturally there are also guys with outstanding performance and good talent. Prome said that few of the guys in the 3,000 recruit group stayed in the headquarters like him. Most of them voluntarily chose to go to the four seas to go to work, and some died in the battle with pirates over the years. But today there are still a large number of officers. Even, Vice Admiral, Rear Admiral layer is not uncommon. Among them, the powerful ones are not inferior to the generals of the same level in the headquarters. And this is also the reason why many people in this department are afraid of his return. Because as long as Zhang Lu is in the headquarters, it is a powerful force. These guys who are scattered all over the place have little contact on weekdays, and they all guard their own 1/3 of an acre of land. But if they hear that their admiral has returned, then no matter what the mountains and rivers are, they will return immediately. In the afternoon of that day, warships entered the Gate of Justice. The man on the head of the warship was a burly man, with a pair of knives on his waist, his eyes were majestic, his body was very murderous, and his white cloak of justice trembled in the strong wind. When the warship entered the Gate of Justice, the man suddenly raised his head, looked at the city wall and shouted, Promi, you guy, you are still guarding the gate here. If I went to the world like Lousy, I would have been promoted to Vice Admiral. Ha ha ha, Bagu, you haven't seen him for so many years, and you still look like this murderous look. Isn't the second sword-style swordsmanship degraded? Hearing this, Promi also responded with a big smile. You can roll down and try, Lousy's second sword, but Admiral taught it himself. Bagu shouted loudly, Admiral is in the headquarters, you better be quiet. Prome stood on the wall and said loudly, ha ha ha, I've been waiting for this moment for 20 years. Bagu said excitedly, finally see you, Mr. Zhang Lu. And on the warships behind him, there is also a man with a general rank on his shoulders, with a majestic and powerful momentum. Prome, long time no see. With a sniper rifle on his back, the man with sharp eyes like an eagle shouted with a smile. Yiggle, you are here too. Prome was surprised. The other party is the best sniper in the recruit group, but he has been unknown. But in terms of strength, it is definitely a good hand. I'll see Admiral. Iger laughed. Ha ha ha, you guys are all running towards Admiral before responding to the headquarters call, right? Advertisement. It really doesn't follow any rules. Prome laughed. He looked towards the rear warship again, and saw familiar figures standing on the bows of these ships. If it wasn't for knowing that Admiral was still alive and still in the marine, we would have been ed. Woohoo, let me go, don't cover my mouth. At this moment, a voice sounded from the warship in the rear, and then it stopped abruptly. Gariro, your mouth still doesn't close the door, this is naval headquarters, don't give lousy nonsense. Then, an angry roar sounded. Prome grinned. Gariro, Orbis. Hearing his name, the blonde Orbis raised his head with a smile, waved at him, and then explained to the stunned Marines on both sides. He's drunk and talking nonsense. I promise, we have absolutely no resistance to Marine, we are the most just and loyal officers. Bearded Gorillo snorted and muttered something, but no one could hear it. The other officers on the nearby city wall all had outrageous expressions. Who would believe the other party's remarks? But no one said a word, and everyone with discernment could see it. This group of guys came in groups, and every level was not low. In the sea areas under their respective jurisdiction, they are all local overlords, and they are extremely difficult to provoke. When these warships approached the port one by one, Vice Admiral, who was in charge of the reception, was shocked. Bagu, Yiger, Gorillo, Orbis, the four of you guys are here too. And those who follow, these generals. Bagu grinned. The headquarters, order, of course we have to come. It's not just us, a lot of guys are coming. Yi Gear said quietly. His falcon-like eyes were very sharp. Hey hey, who are you? Where's the Admiral? Where is our Admiral? Lousy wants to see Admiral. Galiro exclaimed, looking around. You give me a moment of silence, Gorillo. Orbis roared. But Vice Admiral, who received him, didn't care at all, but smiled. Jang Lu Admiral is now in the headquarters. However, don't yell, so as not to cause misunderstanding. After a pause, Vice Admiral lowered his voice again. His current rank is Colonel. Colonel Dog Day, Admiral will always be Admiral in my heart. If he is a colonel, are these spicy chickens in the headquarters still worthy of being a colonel? Gario cursed. Advertisement. Be restrained, Gorillo, this is the headquarters after all. Bagu turned back and shouted in a deep voice. Humph. The latter rolled his eyes, but said nothing. Vice Admiral finally breathed a sigh of relief. Come with me, your resting place is already ready. There's another guy who hasn't arrived. Wait a minute. Bagu said. Who? Vice Admiral wondered. Several people did not answer, but turned their heads and looked at the door of justice. On the gate wall, Promi looked at the huge warship ahead, took a deep breath, and sighed. Ronsa, it's here too. The warship entering the gate of justice at this moment is dozens of times larger than ordinary ships, and at the bow of the ship is a huge figure sitting cross-legged. His height reached an astonishing 80 to 90 meters. Sitting there, it was like a mountain, giving people a lot of pressure. Giant Vice Admiral, when this warship sailed into the inner bay. Ronsa, did you come to see Admiral too? Garp's voice came from one side. Sengoku frowned and sighed softly. Ronsa lowered his head, looked at his old friend whom he hadn't seen for many years, and said excitedly. This is the reason why Zhonglu is called a double-edged sword. These guys are here, but with their participation, this battle will also be more certain. Ha 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 ha, you should have another headache, Sengoku. For some people, this is the first time in their life that they have seen a giant clan. At the same time, the marshal's office, at the window. Certainly, Bagu laughed. Then come with us. Vice Admiral, who was in charge of the reception, sighed in shock. A moment later, the giant Vice Admiral Ronsa came to the port, his huge soul stepped on the ground, making a loud noise, and the surrounding soldiers gasped in shock. Sengoku looked down at the group of Marines who were moving in the square, with complicated expressions in his eyes. Bagu grinned. Chapter 102. I swear to follow. The only thing I can't control is Zhonglu. Muttering, Sengoku's eyes flickered. Although the other party's performance these days is quite satisfactory, there is nothing out of the ordinary, but this also makes him more worried. It's so abnormal. With Zhonglu's temperament, he is not such a quiet guy at all. What the hell is this guy doing? Sengoku's heart was dignified. But at this moment, with the gradual arrival of the 3,000 elites, they had to admit that the other party had become a powerful fighting force in the headquarters. Together, this force will play a vital role in the battle against the Whitebeard Pirates. Just watch them reunite like this. Sengoku. These guys don't listen to anyone, they only listen to Zhonglu. Garp said with a smile. Even though Zhonglu said on the surface that he would not care about Ace's execution, he still had some kind of expectation in his heart. When you can't do something yourself, you always put your hope on others, which is Garp's state of mind at the moment. We have to keep a close eye on Zhonglu, so that this guy doesn't make mistakes again. Sengoku sighed. At the same time, in front of the headquarters building. Bang 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 bang. As the giant Vice Admiral Ronsa stepped, the ground was shaking. His huge body was so shocking that many people looked up at the huge figure in front of them and were shocked. Giant's Vice Admiral. It's really hard to understand how such a guy was conquered by Zhonglu in the first place. On the battlefield, the giants are simply invincible and powerful. One after another voice came out, resounding in Marineford. Bagu, Yi Gear and others walked towards the headquarters silently. When they came to the gate of the headquarters, they paused slightly. You guys are all here. Don't mess around, this is the headquarters. It's all a bunch of unscrupulous, unorganized and undisciplined guys. These guys are the scum of the Marines. All eyes in the headquarters building fell on them, and various words with different tones followed. Ha ha, I can see that some guys don't welcome us very much. Advertisement. Yi Jie smiled faintly. They're all trash who once knelt down in front of us begging for mercy. With a fierce look in his eyes, Gorillo said loudly, not paying attention to the gazes around him. That's why I didn't want to stay here back then. Without Zhonglu Admiral, even Marine's backbone, Marineford, means nothing to us. Bagu said coldly. Ronsa, you're just waiting here, you're so big you can't get in. Orbis turned around and shouted at the giant Vice Admiral. Okay, I'm here waiting for you and Admiral. Ronsa Ern said. Bagu and the others glanced around the hall, showing a sneer, and then came to the front desk. Help me find out where Zhonglu Admiral's office is. Zhonglu Admiral. Oh, you mean Colonel Zhonglu, right? The female Marine at the front desk was stunned for a moment, then suddenly realized. Colonel of shit, it's Zhonglu Admiral. A guy like you, at Lousy's base, let you clean the toilet right away. Galero immediately went berserk, slapped the table, and roared loudly. Huh, well, Zhonglu Admiral, he's here. The female Marine, who was in charge of the reception, broke out in a cold sweat. She noticed that the group of people in front of her were all generals. Humph, show me some respect for Admiral. Gorillo turned around, but he was already looking like he was angry. Marine, the woman at the front desk, shivered and didn't know where she was going wrong. According to the archives, Marine named Zhonglu was indeed a colonel. The eyes in the hall were different, and they all quietly watched this scene, and no one made the first bird to say anything. Everyone knows very well that this group of guys is located in the Four Seas, far away from the Emperor Tiangao, and they are used to being wild, but their strength is not inferior to the elites of the headquarters, and they are not easy to provoke. On the other side, in Zhonglu's office, Freya watched Bagu and the others walk into the headquarters building, and the giant vice admiral sitting on the platform in front of the building, with amazement and brilliance in his eyes, and turned to Zhonglu. Sir, are they all your subordinates? Zhonglu smiled. Yes, I used to bring out the soldiers, but now they have turned into such a bad look. All of them are generals. Freya exclaimed. Taking a deep breath, she said again, they are coming soon. Hee hee, yes, just to see how these guys have grown now. Zhonglu smiled, and a look of anticipation flashed in his eyes. Advertisement. A moment later, outside the closed door of the office, there were dense footsteps, and then there was a careful knock on the door. Please come in. With a smile on Zhonglu's face, he shouted loudly. The door was suddenly pushed open, and what caught the eye was a group of middle-aged men with nervous, apprehensive faces, looking forward to all kinds of complicated expressions. Admiral. With a trembling voice, Bagu walked in, with a pair of eyes staring excitedly at the young man sitting there, who didn't seem to have any changes. Admiral, I miss you, woo woo woo. Gario cried and squeezed Bagu away and rushed in, tears welling up in his eyes instantly. Yi Gear and Orbis all looked at Zhonglu excitedly. Ha ha ha, I miss you too. 20 years, I didn't expect everyone to meet again one day. Zhonglu stood up and looked at the familiar faces, feeling very excited. These guys were all the soldiers he taught and brought up since recruiting. Today, it has become the mainstay of Marine. With the rank of Vice Admiral hanging on his shoulders, placed in the Four Seas, it is definitely a stable base commander level, and it is counted as a frontier official guarding one side. Admiral, what are your plans? I don't think we should be the Marine. Gorillo gritted his teeth and said, seeing the rank of Colonel on Admiral's shoulders, he was both wronged and angry. Damn Sengoku, damn Naval Headquarters, when has his Admiral been wronged like this? A mere Colonel position, who do you look down on? Zhonglu opened his mouth and looked at Gorillo, clearly feeling the other party's full of emotions and respect for him, and couldn't help but chuckle. You idiot. Woo 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 woo. I haven't heard Admiral call me that in 20 years. Gorillo couldn't stop crying. In the end, he threw himself directly into Zhonglu's arms. This guy had a big beard, but his attitude made everyone laugh and cry. Admiral, what are your plans next? We are the first to arrive at the headquarters, and the brothers from other recruit groups will arrive later. Whatever you want to do, we will support you this time. After a pause, Yiger's falcon-like eyes were extremely sharp. Where are you going? We swear to follow you to the death. This time, don't even think about throwing us away. Chapter 103 You Little Goblin. The door of the office was closed tightly for some time. All the voices in it naturally cannot reach the outside. Freya was stunned and looked at the group of people in front of her. So bold. It's just so open to show loyalty here, and it's not aimed at Marine, but only at her superior. Do these guys mean to defect? Madman. Hehehehe. Zhonglu suddenly laughed, and his expression was filled with emotion and joy. It's my honor to have a subordinate like you, Zhonglu. Since we meet again today, don't mention these things again. Saying that, he strode over and hugged everyone present. Bagu, Yi Gear, Orbis and others were all very excited at this moment, and seeing Admiral made them very excited. However, speaking of it, I do have something that I need your help with. Zhonglu said suddenly. What's up? We'll do anything for you as long as Admiral orders it. Bagu and the others immediately shouted loudly. Ha ha ha, I will tell you when the time is right in the future. Now, 20 years later, when we meet again, of course we have to drink and celebrate. Zhonglu's eyes flickered slightly, then laughed. Good, drink. Gorillo shouted excitedly. Freya. Bring us a drink. Zhonglu laughed. Freya was stunned for a moment, then quickly said, okay. After a while, Zhonglu, Bagu and others gathered in a small open space in Marineford, with various foods and barbecues in front of them. Ronsa, you still look the same. Zhonglu looked up at Vice Admiral, the giant sitting next to him, and said with a big laugh. Giants have long lifespans. 20 years really doesn't mean much to us, Admiral. Ronsa said. Ha 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 ha. Zhonglu laughed, then his face became serious, looking at the familiar faces in front of him, he slowly raised the wine in the bowl. At this moment, the people gathered in front of him are not only Bagu and others, but also Promi, and some school officials who were in the headquarters before. There are about 20 or 30 people in total, all of whom were members of the recruit group. Celebrate our reunion. Advertisement. Taking a deep breath, Zhonglu said loudly. Celebrate the reunion. All the Marines also shouted, then raised their heads and drank the wine from their bowls. Ha 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 ha. A burst of laughter came from this open space, which also made Freya, who was standing by the side, complicated. Such a relationship between superiors and subordinates made her feel a little admired and envied. A serious organization like Marine has very strict rules for getting along with superiors and subordinates. Subordinates must obey the orders of their superiors. It is almost non-existent for Zhonglu to be so intimate with a group of his former subordinates. What kind of charm does this man have? Freya sighed in her heart. After getting along for a short time, she gradually felt the subtle and strange attraction of the other party, so that she couldn't help but take the initiative to get close to the other party. But my officer seems to be hiding huge ambitions. His purpose in marine is not simple. It's really annoying. Not far ahead, the aroma of the wine was strong, and there were bursts of laughter in the interlacing, and after a short interval, the group of guys started singing again. This reunion banquet did not end until the second half of the night, when the ground fell into pieces, and the snoring was even louder. Holding the blanket, Freya walked gently in front of Zhonglu, leaning over and looking at the man in front of her seriously. The handsome face, the long eyelashes, and the sleeping man with his eyes closed exudes a mature and unique charm that made her heart pound. Call. Taking a breath, Freya covered Zhonglu with a blanket. But just as she was about to turn around, the man in front of her suddenly moved and grabbed her wrist. Sir. Freya was surprised. Haha, Freya, you are such a mature and charming little goblin. Zhonglu's face was flushed, his mouth smelled of alcohol, and he said something vague. Then, before Freya could react, the opponent turned his right hand and hit her on the A with a slap. What? Freya's pretty face was pink, and her heart was beating again. When she looked at the man in front of her again, he had fallen down and fell asleep. Stinky man. Unable to help, Freya groaned, turned around and left here quickly. In the distance among the grass, under the cover of night, a figure stood there quietly, taking everything into his eyes. When the moonlight shone, the figure of a woman with a tall and straight body, exuding an icy aura, appeared. Fox spirit. She gritted her teeth and spat out 3 words. The woman's face was as cold as frost. It was Momosugi. Then, she turned away angrily. Advertisement. At dawn the next day, Zhonglu rubbed his sleepy eyes and woke up. Glancing at the surroundings, Bagu, Promi and others are still soundly asleep. Sir, Marshal Sengoku has a request. Freya stepped on high heels, walked over with a smile, and handed him a hot towel. Oh, really? What mission does this guy Sengoku have? Zhonglu took the towel, wiped his face, and asked curiously. It appears to be Sabayati Archipelago. What happened? Freya said solemnly. Sabayati Archipelago. Zhonglu was startled, then smiled. Did the supernova get there? Interesting. He raised his feet and walked towards the headquarters building with a smile on his face. I'm curious. In this era, what is the level of this group of pirate newcomers? Freya followed closely. As for Bagu and the others, who were still sleeping soundly on the ground, no one bothered them. A moment later, in the marshal's office. Is Zhonglu Admiral here too? That's really good news. Polsolino looked up and immediately laughed in surprise when he saw Zhonglu. What's the matter with me? Zhonglu nodded towards the smiling Kizaru, looking at Sengoku. There is news that in the first half of the Grand Line, the supernovas that have become popular in recent times have arrived at Sabayati Archipelago. I called you here to discuss this matter. Sengoku raised his head and said seriously. It's just a group of newcomers, and it deserves your attention. Zhonglu laughed. It's different. These guys are called the extremely evil generation, which shows how vicious they are. Especially the Straw Hats. Having said that, Sengoku paused, then spoke again. Defeat the 2 Wuhai before and after, and make a big noise at Eni's lobby. They are a very difficult group to deal with. Such a group of guys, when they arrive at the Sabayati Archipelago, I'm afraid something big will happen soon. Hearing this, Zhonglu thoughtfully curved the corner of his mouth. It doesn't matter whether it is difficult or not, I am afraid who to send to deal with these newcomers is the problem. The headquarters has already captured one of Garp's grandsons, and if they attack another grandson of Garp, I am afraid that the righteous and honest old man will be mad. Chapter 104 We can cooperate. On the surface, it is to guard against the so-called supernova, but in fact, it is to protect some relationship users on the curve. It's no wonder that in the headquarters, there are always rumors that the water is deep here. Oh, Straw Hat guys. I've been hearing his name a lot lately. Zhonglu said with a smile. With your performance, how can you turn a blind eye? At this moment, when he looked at the other people in the office, he suddenly felt a sense of enlightenment. Marshal Sengoku, Marine Admiral Kizaru, Admiral Aokiji, as for the other Akainu, are not here. In other words, appearing in the office is counted as one's own. So, I'm going to send you to the Sabayati Archipelago to be responsible for some external defense work on it. Of course, your main purpose is to maintain the peace of this island. Sengoku said with a serious expression. For him, the Sabayati Archipelago was indeed a troublesome place. The celestial dragons living on it, the pirates who keep arriving here, and all kinds of social personnel mixed on it. Especially when the supernova of the pirates arrive, the island will evolve into a dynamite barrel that can explode at any time. Under such circumstances, ordinary officers and marines were no longer enough to maintain the stability there. The wicked generation. That's a relatively interesting task. Zhonglu raised his eyebrows and said with a smile. Then please. The branch chief at Sabayati Archipelago, I have informed him. As soon as you pass, you can start work immediately. Sengoku said solemnly. It is good. Zhonglu nodded, then glanced at Kizaru and grinned. Polsolino, do you want to go around? The latter was stunned, and then a smile spread on his face. I will not use it for the time being. Sabayati Archipelago, with Zhonglu Admiral you, there will be no problem. Ha ha ha, if there is an accident, you have to support it in time. Zhonglu said with a smile. As if feeling the other party's good intentions, Kizaru also responded with a smile. Sure, definitely, I feel honored to be able to fight alongside you. We are about the same age, you are too polite. Zhonglu laughed again. It's easy to say, you are stronger. Kizaru had a smile on his face, making it impossible to pick out any questions. After lunch, Zhang Lu took Freya to the Sabayati archipelago for his post. Speaking of which, this kind of temporary stationing and the task of maintaining a region's stability, he has not taken less frequently before. Sabayati archipelago, 20 years ago, was his residence for a while. The person in charge of the garrison of the Sabayati archipelago is called Beyonce, formerly Naval Headquarters Vice Admiral, who was transferred to the Sabayati archipelago 2 years ago. Advertisement. Freya looked at the information in the document and said softly. Beyonce. Hearing the name, Zhang Lu raised his eyebrows. You know him, Freya said in surprise. Some impressions. Zhang Lu nodded. 20 years ago, many unknown Marines have now become the backbone of the headquarters. A batch of recruits such as Bagu were even promoted to general-level officers. This Beyonce, when he was admiral before, seemed to have heard of it in a recruit training class, and he had some talent. Let's talk about this year, the supernova among the pirates. His eyes flickered slightly. Zhang Lu smiled again. There are 11 supernovas in this year's pirates, and they are all guys with a bounty of more than 100 million Baileys. Also because of their huge bounty and the influence they have caused, they are called the most evil generation. Freya said softly, her tone also becoming serious. Compared to the supernova Cavendish a year ago and the supernova Port Gazdi Ace 3 years ago, this batch of supernovas is more numerous and seems to be more outstanding in terms of strength. Among them, Eustace Kid, who has the highest bounty, has a bounty of 315 million Baileys. The second-ranked Straw Hat Boy, Luffy, also has a huge bounty of 300 million Bailey. Such a bounty, just among the newcomers, is amazing. Saying that, Freya sighed in admiration. Bounties generally represent the strength, reputation, and appeal of pirates. Such huge bounties already symbolize the destructive power and influence of these pirates. Kid, Luffy, Zhang Lu smiled. Then, let's try these pirate newcomers to see if there are any interesting and good seedlings. Of course, I'm more interested in that person. Freya looked at him and asked curiously, that person? Well, on the Sabayati archipelago, there is still a guy who has always wanted to fight. Zhang Lu sighed softly. Naturally, he was referring to Pluton Rayleigh, who was the first person he met after Impel Down, and his old rival. Now that I am taking up the post of Sabayati archipelago in person, such an opportunity will of course not be missed. After all, these guys who are getting old, if they don't fight now, they may not have a chance in the future. The opponent that you can always care about, sir, must be extraordinary. Freya laughed. Certainly. Zhang Lu nodded. Advertisement. Hours later, the warship arrived at the Sabayati archipelago. Looking up at the sky, countless bubbles rose continuously, and then shattered with a snap. At the port, countless ships docked here densely. The streets were full of people, and there were street vendors everywhere, and laughter intertwined. It's a lively island. Compared with 20 years ago, there is no change. Zhang Lu exclaimed. The stairs connecting to the port were quickly put away by Marine on the ship, and Freya stood there smiling and waiting for her master. It's time to disembark. Beyonce is still waiting for you at the base. Zhang Lu nodded. It's time to get off the boat. Then, he turned his head suddenly and looked at the sail mast of the warship. I don't know when, a figure has been sitting there quietly. Want to be together. Bartholomew Bear. Freya's eyes widened in surprise. When did he get on the boat? He's been sitting there since we set out. Zhang Lu squinted and smiled, looking at the figure sitting on the mast. Thank you for the downwind boat. Bartholomew Shong's figure flashed, and the next second, he was in front of Zhang Lu, and said expressionlessly. No thanks, Bear, and I didn't invite you on board. Zhang Lu smiled lightly. As that's so, I'm sorry that I interrupted. The bear was silent for a while, then said solemnly. Let's go together, you seem to have something to say to me. Zhang Lu smiled. Bartholomew Bear nodded, showing no emotion from his expression, like an emotionless robot. The two walked down the steps one after another, with Freya following behind. On the bustling street, Zhang Lu walked side by side with the bear. I know the purpose of your trip. The bear suddenly said. And, for sure, you won't stay here. Such words made Zhang Lu laugh. The so-called here, of course, does not refer to Sabayati archipelago, but refers to Marine. I know your purpose too, Bear. Zhang Lu paused and looked at each other. Maybe, we can work together. Chapter 105 Talk to the Bear. Cooperation. Bartholomew Bear stared at the man in front of him and fell silent. After a long while, he spoke lightly. To be honest, I can't see through you, and I don't even know what your purpose is. Under such circumstances, how can we talk about cooperation? Very calm and candid. In the eyes of Bartholomew Shong, Zhang Lu is undoubtedly a mysterious and powerful man. On the surface, it seems that he is now a Marine, but the purpose hidden under this identity is doubtful. If it was Marine, the positions of the two sides would be delicate, and otherwise, it would be difficult to predict. Simply put, it would be very dangerous and risky to cooperate with such a guy. Moreover, his current situation is not very good. Ha ha ha, Bear, you're one of the few men I admire. With a smile on his face, Zhang Lu took another step and walked forward. It would be a pity if a guy like you just disappeared from the world like that. The words of exclamation drifted, and Bartholomew Bear's eyes narrowed. Then, he stepped forward and followed. In the noisy street crowd, the two were one after the other and did not talk anymore. Which step have we reached? After a while, Jang Lu suddenly asked again. The collaborative trial with Vegapunk should have changed your body already. The tone was plain and casual, like greetings from old friends. I'm running out of time. Bear said in a deep voice. Afterwards, he knocked on his abdomen, making a thumping sound of gold and iron. Jang Lu was startled, shook his head and sighed, this is not a good choice. For certain beliefs, ideals, the necessary sacrifices are worth it. Said the bear. Faith, ideal. Jang Lu suddenly showed emotion. This is a sea world that yearns for freedom and dreams. Many young people are also carrying the goals in their hearts and go to the sea firmly. For the blood of the heart, the ideal can give everything. Do you know what's going to happen to you? He asked softly again. The footsteps of the two gradually slowed down, and the mixed voices on both sides have been blocked by them, and they can only hear each other's words. Talk to Vegapunk and they're going to transform me into a robot. Advertisement. Said the bear. You'll lose your consciousness, and that means, you'll be out of this world. Even, you may face a more tragic life. Jang Lu said softly, his face complicated. The bear in the original book, after undergoing transformation, guarded the sunshine for 2 years, and did not leave until the arrival of Luffy's crew. But in the end, he became a plaything slave of celestial dragons. It can be said that this powerful Wu-Hai, whose fruit ability can be called a bug, ended up being the worst, and he was sighed by countless people. But at the same time, he is also a very gentle person. The world calls him a tyrant, but he is a guy who has faith, and is gentle enough to sacrifice everything for others. Everyone will die. Doing something meaningful is really alive. Bartholomew Bear said. His tone was calm and he didn't seem to have any emotion, but Jang Lu understood that this was the result of mechanical transformation. After all, machines are emotionless. That's what Roger is. Hearing this, Jang Lu laughed. Did you say Roger? Haha, that guy is great for many people, but in my opinion, he is the person I despise the most. The guy who's going to die, and he's here to harm people. Bartholomew Shong replied calmly. Facing life and death calmly is not something ordinary people can do. Interesting statement. Do you actually worship Roger? Jang Lu laughed. Just agree. Bear said lightly. Ha 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 ha. Jang Lu laughed. Before they knew it, the two of them had crossed the street and came to a forest. Between the huge trees, countless bubbles floated to the top, cracked with a snap, and a crisp shattering sound came out. There was no one around, and Freya couldn't keep up with the footsteps of the two, and she didn't intend to eavesdrop on their conversation, so she stayed behind. I want to change the world. In a sense, I and Dorag want to do the same thing. The words that came out suddenly made Bartholomew Shong pause in his footsteps, and turn to look at the young man in the cloak of justice in front of him. You all know, Shong asked in a deep voice. I know everything, Bear, your relationship with the Revolutionary Army, your experiment with Vegapunk, your deal with the world government, what you are here for. And the fate of the future. Advertisement. Jang Lu sighed softly. On the Moria ship, you shot the Straw Hats, but you didn't kill them. Is it because you know that Luffy is Dorag's son? The bear was silent, a light flashing in his eyes. Is it also for the Straw Hats who have arrived at Saadi Archipelago? So, is the order Long gave you to be his son's bodyguard? Jang Lu said thoughtfully. Or, this is your own idea. You want to use the remaining life to leave something for the dragon and some hope for the world. The light in Bartholomew Bear's eyes became more condensed. Ha ha ha, you don't have to think about killing me. Maybe your Shichibukai's strength is really good, but in front of me, it's far from enough to see. Jang Lu raised his head and smiled. The whole body looked like he didn't care. So frankly saying everything, what's your purpose? Shang Shensheng spoke, and it could be seen that he was very serious and solemn. Purpose. No purpose. Jang Lu shook his head. It's just admiration for you. It would make me feel very sorry that you really died. So, let's work together and change the world together. Unlike dragons, I don't think overthrowing kingdoms can do anything to the world. What kind of achievements will the Revolutionary Army achieve in the end? It's better, with the strongest power, smash everything that exists, and then start over, break and stand up, and then build a brand new world. Shang's eyes flashed slightly. It sounds like you are another Revolutionary Army. But I'm sorry, I'm running out of time, and I'm going to die with a mission. Our cooperation is naturally out of the question. Jang Lu smiled and said seriously, what if I rescue you from the dead again and give you a second life? New life. If you can still survive and give your life the kindness of life, it is naturally worthy of me to follow you. The bear was startled and nodded. He was also curious about what kind of sky this man could create. Jang Lu laughed when he heard this assurance. Did you know, the headquarters attaches great importance to the Straw Hats. Once they make a big deal here, I'm afraid Admiral is going to play. Bartholomew Bear nodded. Really? Chapter 106 The Akainu Lineage. Marine sent Jang Lu, a big man who could suppress Shichibukai, to Saadi Archipelago. This kind of battle naturally made the bears who were concerned about the Straw Hats feel nervous. After all, what this rookie pirate group has done in recent days is an unimaginable big event. Shang didn't know that Jang Lu came to Saadi Archipelago because Sengoku was in some kind of guilt or unbearable decision for his old friend. The pain and anger of losing a grandson and losing another grandson are not the same thing. Naval headquarters has a Jang Lu whose purpose is unclear and makes people unable to see through it. If you add a garp, even Sengoku can't eat it. What a troublesome bunch, the Straw Hats. Jang Lu smiled. Bartholomew Bear did not answer any more, and walked forward in silence. He didn't know the big man in front of him, his attitude towards the Straw Hats, and the promise he made earlier could also be regarded as a compromise. The only sacrifice is the freedom if he can survive in the near future. If it's you, you shouldn't shoot at them, right? After a while, Shang suddenly asked. Who knows? They are pirates after all, and I am a righteous marine now. Jang Lu smiled. The two walked all the way, not too fast but not too slow, and in a blink of an eye, they saw the prominent marine base in front of them. Looking up at the area number on the tree, there is clearly engraved Area 65. Saadi Archipelago has a strict number for the area, and the 60 to 69 area is exactly where the marine station is, where the government entrance and exit are located. After arriving here, Bartholomew Shang paused and stopped. What? Won't you come in with me? Jang Lu asked. It is a worthwhile trip to walk with Jang Lu Admiral, talk frankly, and understand your ideals and beliefs. If you keep going, it will be very troublesome for me and you. Bartholomew Shang said solemnly. You are really a very gentle person, Bear. Jang Lu was stunned for a moment, then smiled. Goodbye by fate. The bear nodded, turned around and flickered a few times before disappearing. If such a guy dies, the world will regret it. Muttering, Jang Lu looked at the marine base in front of him. Bartholomew Bear is a guy he admires very much. He has both strength and conviction, and he is cold on the outside but gentle on the inside. Advertisement. If you can act together with each other, it should be a very happy thing, right? Freya followed after a while, panting and said, Sir, you guys are walking too fast, don't wait for me. It's too slow, Freya. With your physical fitness, it doesn't look like a major of the headquarters. Jang Lu said with a smile. They are girls, Freya muttered. The destination has arrived, let's go and see what this Beyonce Vice Admiral looks like. Jang Lu stepped towards Marine Base. Now that you're on the other side's territory, you have to pay a visit. Moments later, Jang Lu met the Beyonce Vice Admiral at the base. He looks about 40 years old, with blonde hair, and his weapon is a pair of fist hoops. He looks quite easygoing and polite. Headquarters can send Jang Lu Admiral to me to help, it really surprised me, and I am also very pleasantly surprised. After all, these guys called supernovas are not easy to deal with. If I am alone, even with the garrison of Saadi Archipelago, it is difficult to control the situation. Beyonce sighed with a smile. As the last island in the first half of the Grand Line, this is almost the meeting point for all the pirate groups that come and go. For this reason, the chaos of law and order in the Saadi Archipelago is notoriously the most difficult to manage. Various classes, forces, and mixed characters are mixed together, making the situation here even more difficult to get along with. I heard that Jang Lu Admiral was stationed here for a while before, so he should understand my distress. If it's just these pirates, it's better to say, but some difficult guys are also here. Beyonce said worriedly. Jang Lu nodded with a smile, of course he knew that Saadi Archipelago was difficult to manage. The power of celestial dragons, the dog legs of some nobles in the New World, the power of the underground world, various auction slave farms. Homicide cases, all kinds of difficult cases, are enough to make the guy in charge of this place devastated. But he didn't plan to say anything more to this guy, because according to Freya's intelligence, Beyonce's immediate boss was a Kainu. Jang Lu Admiral came to me, take a good rest for a while. For now, the island is relatively peaceful for the time being. Beyonce said again. Don't worry about me, I'll go around by myself. Advertisement. I heard that Beyonce Vice Admiral is good at 6 forms. Jang Lu laughed. Yes, speaking of the 6 forms, during the process of cultivating it, I was able to enter a higher realm by reading some of the experience Jang Lu Admiral once left behind. Beyonce's eyes showed gratitude. Among the recruits of the same era, who doesn't know the legendary Day Tiger Admiral? Even if he doesn't know him, his 6 style fine arts left in the army have influenced a large number of people. Even today, that booklet is still influencing generations of recruits. That's a coincidence, haha. Jang Lu said unexpectedly. After a while of chatting, the relationship between the two seemed to be much closer. Subsequently, Jang Lu left under the leadership of Marine. The smile on Beyonce's face gradually faded, and he frowned. The headquarters actually sent this person here. What's the meaning? The mere supernova, the strength of the Saadi Archipelago, and the distance from the headquarters so far, any accident is enough to solve them in a short time. Absolutely, we must eradicate all that are not left behind. Following Akainu, one of the 3 admiral, he also upheld absolute justice and treated all criminals without mercy. This Beyonce is not as upright as his superiors, and he knows a bit of the world. Speaking of which, Marshal Sengoku's term is coming to an end, right? The next marshal, hopefully, will be Sakazuki Admiral. Freya blinked, showing a puzzled expression. Or is there something big going on here? A stronger guy is hiding. No matter what the circumstances, in the name of Akainu Admiral's absolute justice, these scum on the sea, once I find traces. To meet an old rival. Jang Lu waved his hand and walked out of the room. As for Jang Lu, the other party is currently beyond his reach, and the existence of collision, it is understandable to give a bit of face, and to be close. Where are you going? After returning to the house that Beyond's arranged for him, Jang Lu also laughed. In the words, a vague fighting spirit emerged, but it quickly disappeared. I've wanted to see him for many years. Then, she saw that her own official got up again. With her wisdom, she couldn't understand the unpredictable undercurrents surging between these officers, and she only felt that the atmosphere between them was harmonious. After all, he is not a Kainu admiral. After a pause, Beyonce's eyes turned cold. Chapter 107 Allegiance to me. Old rival. The person who can be Admiral's opponent should be a powerful and dangerous guy in Freya's heart. Although she didn't know how terrible Jang Lu's combat power was 20 years ago. But in front of the headquarters building, the 1-on-3 battle was clearly seen. The two then started walking on the Saadi archipelago until they found a bar the next morning. Shaki's ripping off bar. Speaking of this strange name, Freya showed a confused expression on her face. I found it. That guy should be right here. Jang Lu had an uplifting expression on his face. Another old opponent from the old era. He was in a hurry last time, and he was a little regretful that he didn't have a chance to fight. But this time, coming in as Colonel Marine and fighting with him was definitely something Naval Headquarters would love to see. Likewise, it was the scene he was looking forward to. Long-lost excitement. Muttering, Jang Lu strode into it. However, to his disappointment, after scanning around, he could not find the figure of the man. The woman in front of the bar was wiping a cup with a cigarette in her mouth. When she saw him coming in, her body was slightly startled, and her pupils suddenly contracted. But soon, the woman relaxed, holding the cigarette between her right index finger and middle finger, and exhaled a puff of smoke. What to drink? This, sir. After Jang Lu glanced around, he couldn't find his target, and turned to the bar in disappointment. I'm looking for someone. His eyes narrowed, and he stared at the woman in front of him. Looking for someone. That might disappoint you, and you can see that it's empty except for me. Not even a single guest. The woman shrugged and smiled. I'm looking for it, Silver Rayleigh. Jang Lu's face was flat, still staring at each other. I don't know the person you're talking about at all. The woman was stunned, and then said regretfully. Yes. Jang Lu suddenly laughed too. Then sorry for disturbing you. After speaking, he turned a few steps and left the place again. But the woman standing in front of the bar didn't let out a sigh of relief until she saw the other party completely disappear from her eyes, and the smile on her face was replaced by a dignified expression. This guy, actually found here. And the target, is that old man. Taking a deep breath, the woman exhaled the smoke fiercely, and the woman said in a low voice with an ugly expression. This time, it's a troublesome existence. Rayleigh. This woman is naturally Shaki, also known as Shaki, who lives with Rayleigh. 40 years ago, he was a pirate, and then he retired here, and he is also an information officer. Day Tiger Jang Lu, she naturally recognized it. He was even more shocked by the sudden arrival of the other party, and had an intuition that it would be a very troublesome incident. There was even an urge to drag Rayleigh and flee the island immediately. Hope everything is fine. Rayleigh, and the sweet straw hat guys. Advertisement. After a while, Saadi was on the street. Jang Lu was in front and Freya was behind, and the two seemed to be walking aimlessly. Sir, didn't you find your old rival in that bar? Freya asked curiously. I didn't find it, but I found it. Jang Lu said with a smile. What? Freya raised her head with a cute puzzled, blank expression. Let's go. He must still be on this island, just look for some guys and you can find him. Jang Lu grinned. Then, he turned his head and glanced at the number engraved on the big tree next to him, which read the big 31GR. The streets were full of people, and many children were playing and running on the green lawn with bright smiles on their faces. It's nice here, sir. Freya couldn't help but exclaim. Blocks 30 to 39 of the Saadi archipelago, mainly soap bubble parks, are also places for entertainment. Naturally, it will be more lively. Jang Lu smiled lightly. It would be nice if I could take some time off here and play those exciting activities with the commander. Freya said expectantly. What exciting activity do you want to play? Jang Lu asked with a smile. Freya's face blushed. Sir, you can stimulate as much as you want. Quote. Jang Lu was speechless. Can this also drive? He. Sir, at your age, don't you have a girlfriend yet? Freya asked with a smile. No, Jang Lu said. It is rumored that you have a deep relationship with Momoshiki Vice Admiral. Freya said with a smile. We are very good friends. Jang Lu replied. However, Momoshiki Vice Admiral seems to like you very much, haven't you made a pair with her after all these years? Freya blinked, staring at each other. She wouldn't tell the officer that Momoshiki Vice Admiral had personally approached her not long ago. But how could Freya admit defeat? Handsome Admiral, who is willing to give up? Woman, it will affect the speed at which I draw the knife. Jang Lu replied, but his footsteps paused slightly, and his eyes were also looking at the street ahead. The lively and noisy street, the atmosphere changed suddenly, a tall figure with a collar around his neck blocked everyone's way. Help me. Suddenly, a miserable, desperate roar sounded, suppressing all the laughter. Freya's expression changed slightly, and she also looked forward. Advertisement. That is, explosive collars used by slaves. If you leave the master within a certain range, it will automatically explode. Jang Lu said lightly. Slave. That doesn't mean, Tianlong. Halfway through speaking, Freya's face suddenly changed dramatically, she covered her mouth, and her eyes searched everywhere. The naked eye can clearly see that the civilians on the entire street are panicking at this moment. Even the child who was sitting at a high place was driven down by the adults with a blank face. Everyone was panicking and shaking, and the atmosphere on the street changed drastically in an instant. You, sir. But soon, Freya saw that Jang Lu seemed completely unaffected, and strode towards the pirates ahead. At this moment, the pirate had raised a woman with both hands, and shouted again and again with a painful and desperate expression. Help me, take off the collar on my neck. No matter what tool you use, please, save me. I want to go home. The woman was also very frightened and screamed again and again. The surrounding civilians were all panicked and did not dare to approach. I won't hurt you, please help me. I still have a wife and children waiting for me in my hometown. I just want to go home, the child was just born when I left, I just want to see him once. The child still doesn't know what his father looks like. The tall pirate showed despair, let go of the woman, and burst into tears. I've given up on going to New World. Please, no matter who it is, save me. I want to go home. His despair, pain, everyone can see clearly. Ding 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 ding. The pirate trembled, and hurriedly shouted, I accept. In the next second, Jang Lu shot, stretched out his right hand and squeezed the collar, and made a sudden force. Celestial dragons, won't let him go. I don't want to be a pirate anymore. Do you accept? Suddenly, a voice sounded, and the pirate looked up suddenly. At this moment, the collar on the neck made a rapid sound, and the fear and despair on the pirate's face deepened. Everyone looked at this scene in horror and knew exactly what would happen next. Jang Lu reminded. There was an explosion in the street, and smoke rose. Damn it, don't. Everyone was stunned at this moment. In the next second, someone swallowed and looked at the marine in the field. The man with short black hair and a knife on his waist was in front of him in a few steps, staring at him with his eyes. Boom. Save you and be loyal to me. What did he do? The sound on the collar is faster and it's about to explode. You have no time to hesitate. Chapter 108 How dare he? Curling green smoke rose into the air, and all the civilians stood there with stunned and astonished expressions, looking at the back of the field that turned away from everyone. The collar that was broken into two pieces on the ground was bubbling thick smoke, and the surrounding soil was also blown black. Crash. Suddenly, a breeze blew, and the cloak engraved with the word justice shuddered. Hey, remember, pirate, you will be mine from now on. Jang Lu grinned and looked forward to the tall, gasping man with a shocked, panicked expression. You saved me. The pirate said in shock, glanced at the collar with smoke fluttering on the ground, and touched his neck again. When he felt empty, he quickly became excited. Saved. I was really saved, he yelled excitedly. Hee, can you be saved? Being under my command may not necessarily be happier than being a slave to celestial dragons. Jang Lu grinned. The tall pirate took a deep breath, then solemnly looked at the man in front of him. Judging from the cloak behind him, it was a marine. Boom. Soon he was on his knees, his forehead pressed to the ground. You saved my life, and from now on, it is my lord. Zanbu is willing to follow you, I just ask you to give me a chance to return to my hometown. Having said that, the pirate Zanbu cried again. Go and see my child who has never seen his father. Woo 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 woo. Jang Lu looked down at the man on the ground with a calm expression. Get up, I will give you this chance. Hearing the words, Zambo trembled, showing a touch of gratitude, raised his head and stood up slowly. At this time, the surrounding civilians also breathed a sigh of relief. In any case, the tragedy seems to have been stopped. Wow, it's him, the guy the first met in Magic Valley Town. Meet Robin. Standing not far away, the Straw Hat Boy and others recognized Jang Lu and said with a smile. Dare to save the Celestial Dragon's slave, still a marine, which is really admirable. But, he's about to be in trouble soon. Fishman Little 8 said solemnly. Aha, Luffy blinked and looked down the street again. Soon, he felt that the atmosphere changed again. The tension of the civilians did not relax at all. Instead, close to the area in front, one after another silhouettes had hurriedly knelt down, their foreheads pressed against the ground, and their whole body was shaking slightly. Advertisement. Quick, get off the bubble car, here comes the Celestial Dragons. Xiao Ba's expression changed and he hurriedly shouted. At this time, Freya was shaking all over, and the tense atmosphere made her scalp tingle. Sir, you are in a big trouble. Celestial Dragons are coming. Walking quickly to Jang Lu, Freya whispered. Yes. Jang Lu smiled, his eyes flicked around, and he glanced around. Marine, who was patrolling, hid in the alleyway, trembling and afraid to show his face. The civilians on both sides of the street fell silent, fell to their knees, and prayed for safety. Pirate Zambo's face changed suddenly, he turned around suddenly, and his whole body was shaking violently. Are you afraid, Zambo? Jang Lu grinned and looked forward. A group of figures are quietly coming here, walking on the street. The whole street, because of their arrival, became silent and terrifying. Everyone was shaking, panicking, shaking. They are here. Zambo trembled all over, took a few steps back, and said in a trembling voice. On the roof of a building in the distance, a huge, silent figure appeared here at an unknown time, watching all this silently. It was Bartholomew Bear, who was dragging the Bible in his right hand, silently, looking down at the street below, looking at a group of people coming from a distance. Celestial Dragons. A low voice spit out from his mouth, with a dignified look in his eyes. These 3 words are undoubtedly like a mountain, heavy on the shoulders of everyone in this world. Don't presume to praise their names, and don't stand in front of them. Their existence is like the gods of the world. And human beings, in front of the nobles of this world, are like all things, let them play and humiliate. It's them. Zambo cried out in horror, his body trembling. It can be seen that he has been scared out of the shadows by the celestial dragons. Even a dog running in front of him scared him to the core. People on the street were shivering, kneeling on the ground, not daring to let out a breath, let alone look up. The smile on Zhang Lu's face also disappeared, replaced by a gloomy and cold look. He looked forward, and a group of figures came into his eyes. The 2 people standing at the front, a woman and a middle-aged man, all had bubbles on their heads. That's why I said, there's something wrong with this world. Whispering softly, Zhang Lu's eyes were no longer warm. Freya, who was standing on the side, even trembled subconsciously. She felt that the officer at the moment was very terrifying. Clatter. Advertisement. Suddenly, Zhang Lu took a step forward. Everyone was stunned, and no one thought that when the Celestial Dragons team came, there were still people who dared to go to them. Why is that uncle still walking forward? Luffy said stunned. When Xiao Ba heard the words, he looked up nervously, and then hurriedly shouted, is he crazy? Many people's attention was stunned by Zhang Lu's bold, heaven-defying behavior at this moment. What is he going to do? Bartholomew Bear stared, and there seemed to be light in his eyes. What a surprise. He's still alive. At this moment, a cold female voice sounded in the street, and the words contained anger. Did you do it? You were so brave, you dare to stand in front of us. The female celestial dragon said coldly. Daughter, this is the first time I've seen such a bold human being. It's just a mere human being, how dare you ignore us like this? The middle-aged male celestial dragons also spoke up. Zhang Lu was expressionless and strode forward. Are you looking for death? The female celestial dragons shouted angrily. How dare you stand in front of me waiting? They don't know, how can such a bold guy suddenly appear? But it is also more fearful because of this. The charge of colliding with celestial dragons is too great. Stop. He raised his right hand and pointed the revolver sharply at the man in front of him. How daring to meddle in a slave who should have died is already a capital offense. On the top of the building, Bartholomew Bear's eyes narrowed to a point. Da 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 da, boom. In a blink of an eye, the 2 sides were already close, only 3 or 4 meters away. At this moment, the civilians kneeling on both sides of the street trembled violently, and a lot of sweat oozes from their bodies. In the blink of an eye, the female celestial dragon saw that the other party was already 1 meter in front of her. Zambo trembled even more at this time, his mouth slightly opened, and he looked at the figure in front of him that was heading straight for the celestial dragons. At the moment when the gunshots sounded, Zhang Lu's figure suddenly moved, and a sharp light flashed through his eyes. She was furious, pulled the trigger without hesitation, and fired abruptly. How dare he? Chapter 109 The Great Guy. Not far away, Luffy, the straw hat boy who had been staring at this place, also widened his eyes. When the gunfire dissipated and he saw the situation on the field, he laughed. Ha 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 ha. Uncle is fine. At this moment, the tense atmosphere is mixed with a touch of icy coldness. You. The female celestial dragon's Shalulia Palace widened her eyes, looked at a man whose face was almost in front of her, and couldn't help but panic. It's really bad. You tribe. Zhang Lu opened his fingers, and a twisted lead bullet that had been hit by deformation fell from the palm of his hand and fell to the ground with a ding sound. Then, he stretched out his right hand suddenly, and wrapped it around the opponent's neck. What? Shalulia Palace screamed in horror. The sudden scene shocked everyone who looked at this place. What is this doing? It was a surprise that a young man, Marine, took action on celestial dragons. Saint Roswald, the middle-aged man standing beside him, raised his gun in a panic, aimed it at Zhang Lu, and shouted angrily. Let go of my daughter, Marine. Behind him, the tall slave bound by the chains looked up at the situation in front of him, and a strange light flashed in his eyes. Put away the toys in your hands. Otherwise, at the moment of the gunshot, I will regard you as my enemy. Zhang Lu said lightly. Afterwards, he didn't care about the threat of Saint Roswald at all, and his eyes were fixed on the Zaluria Palace in front of him again. His right hand suddenly exerted force, and in an instant, the feeling of suffocation swept through Shalulia's body, and fear and despair surged out, causing her to scream in horror. What a disgrace. The dignified celestial dragons even had this desperate, terrified expression. Snapped. Suddenly, the crisp sound of bubbles breaking sounded, and Shalulia Palace was even more terrified. Tears filled her beautiful eyes. Looking at the man in front of her, there was already a hint of prayer. What is the difference between the air of mortals? Zhang Lu asked coldly. B******************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************* trigger. But in the next second, Zhonglu's other hand suddenly raised, 5 fingers slapped, cut through the air, and slapped his face heavily. Snapped. Advertisement. The bubble sank, then shattered, and then, 5 fingers slapped the bearded face of Saint Roswald fiercely. The huge force made his cheeks twist instantly, and the whole person rolled over, turning out of a 360-degree circle, and instantly slammed into the side vendor with a bang. Everyone was stunned, and some people opened their mouths and watched this scene in astonishment. Light flashed in Bartholomew Bear's eyes, and a radiance seemed to be drawn on the mechanical face. Spare me. No, do not want. Shalulia Palace cried in despair. Under the iron hand of the other party, she felt that she was only one step away from death. Fear, an unprecedented sense of nostalgia for life, swept her heart at this moment, making her tremble all over. You guys. 20 years ago, I beat him up once. This high-level look really disgusts me. Why do you always learn badly? Zhang Lu said softly. At this moment, on both sides of the street, a team of Marines rushed over anxiously. Zhang Lu, Admiral, please let go. If it goes on like this, something big will happen. The leader was a major, and the expressions on his face were already crowded into a ball, obviously worrying about to distort. Zhang Lu. On the other side, Saint Roswald, who got up from the ground, reacted suddenly and looked at Zhang Lu again. You are that daring fellow. For a moment, a look of fear and shock appeared on Saint Roswald's face. He recalled what happened 20 years ago. That day, the sky was clear and the Marineford sky was as beautiful, luxurious and comfortable as ever. But a demon appeared, which broke the silence here. He came in almost all the way, and all defenses couldn't stop him. Celestial dragons, who lived in the palace, were beaten by him one after another. Celestial dragons, who are high on weekdays, would never dream that they would be beaten up one day. And what makes Saint Rosward's memory fresh is that his father was beaten into a pig's head by the other party and lay on the hospital bed for half a year. Yes, this guy beat up his father in front of him. And he escaped because he hid in the crowd that day. It turned out to be you. Let go of my daughter, we won't pursue this matter. Saint Roswald said with a trembling voice. You are not qualified to make preconditions in front of me. Zhang Lu said lightly. Saint Roswald's expression was stagnant, and he was rushed by the powerful breath of the other party, and he trembled again, but he was speechless. But then, Zhang Lu glanced at the team led by the major in front of him, then glanced at the surrounding scene and fell silent. Advertisement. However, I didn't want to do anything to you today. It affected my interest. Said lightly, Zhang Lu suddenly raised his hand, and Shalulia Palace was thrown out. Gone. Beckoning, Zhang Lu woke up Freya, who was stunned behind him, and Zambo, whose eyes twinkled with admiration, and trembling with excitement. The three of them walked forward in a wobbly manner. When passing by the slave kneeling on the ground, the latter suddenly raised his head. Please help me. I am willing to follow you, even at the cost of my life. The deep voice sounded, which also made Zhang Lu's footsteps stop. He looked at the man kneeling in front of him, a pair of numb, but full of hopeful emotions, hidden in it. I want this man. Zhang Lu looked at Saint Roswald who was being supported by the guards. Damn it, that's my treasure. Saint Roswald gritted his teeth and cried. I'm not asking for your permission. Zhang Lu said lightly. Afterwards, he slowly bent down, put 2 fingers on the collar of the other's neck, and exerted light force. Clap. The chain was broken, and a circle of chains fell to the ground. The burly man kneeling on the ground was obviously excited. He slowly stood up and looked at Zhang Lu solemnly. Thank you. Zhang Lu smiled and walked forward. Gone. We still have work to do. In this way, in the eyes of everyone present, Colonel Marine, who had a head-on conflict with the Celestial Dragons, swaggered away. Not only was he fine, he even rescued 2 slaves. Xiao Ba said in shock, his eyes strange. Who is he? Bartholomew Shong retracted his eyes, looked at Zhang Lu's disappearing figure, and murmured. With such a move, you are telling the world. Aren't celestial dragons scary? After a pause, the voice seemed to sigh. Amazing guy. Chapter 110. He belongs to the previous era. Ha 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 ha. It's amazing, that uncle. Luffy also grinned, staring at Zhang Lu with a touch of admiration. A man who was fearless and feared by others is the real powerhouse. But soon, his head was pressed to the ground again by Xiao Ba. Because at this time, the 2 celestial dragons had gloomy faces, walked past them quickly, and disappeared soon after. Who the hell is that person who makes everyone so scared? After the celestial dragons dispersed, Luffy and the others asked with a puzzled look. It's celestial dragons, Starfish Papagu said in a deep voice. The reason they're so scared is that as long as the celestial dragons are hurt, Admiral of Naval Headquarters will come with his army. Admiral, Luffy, Chopper, and Brook all widened their eyes and said in surprise. They inherit the blood of the Creator. 800 years ago, 20 kings created the world government, and the celestial dragons are their descendants. The faces of Luffy and the others gradually became serious. It's amazing. That Marine, obviously a Marine, shot celestial dragons. I don't know if there will be any big trouble. When Papa Valley said this, he sighed again. Hearing this, Luffy nodded heavily. Yeah. They met in Magic Valley Town, and it was at that time that they knew each other and Robin. A group of people soon encountered their attackers, and after defeating the other party, under the leadership of Xiao Ba, they arrived at Aunt Xiao's bar again. Aunt Xiao was not surprised when she saw the straw hats in the group. She lit a cigarette and chatted with everyone. But soon, she heard the name Zhang Lu from Luffy and others. Is that so? Have you seen him? With her eyes narrowed, Aunt Xiao sighed and let out a puff of smoke. Do you also know Uncle Zhang Lu? Luffy asked curiously. Although he knew that the other party was acquainted with Robin, and the relationship was not shallow, he did not know exactly who Zhang Lu was. That guy, in that era, no one didn't know him. Aunt Xiao's eyes flashed solemnly and said softly. The one who knows him the most should be Roger, Rayleigh and the others. Luffy widened his eyes and exclaimed in surprise, Roger. Yes, it's One Piece Roger. Aunt Xiao nodded. 20 years ago, he was Marine's strongest admiral, codenamed. After a pause, she said again. Advertisement. Day Tiger. Hey, Straw Hat, your grandpa is Garp, right? And he's the same Marine as your grandfather Garp. Although he is young, he is already a guy from a previous era. Aunt Xiao said slowly. Just because of one thing, he was removed from the position of Marine Admiral, and since then, he has disappeared from the eyes of the world. But in terms of strength, this guy. Taking a deep breath, Aunt Xiao said solemnly. Definitely one of the strongest in the world. Everyone was amazed again. It was completely unexpected that Zhang Lu, who looked ordinary on the outside, still had such an identity. Former Admiral, isn't that a powerhouse on the same level as Aokiji? Chopper yelled, horror in his eyes. Aokiji. Kuzan's 3 boys suffered a lot from him back then. Auntie Xiao smiled. It's amazing. Luffy's eyes glowed. Speaking of which, it's the same purpose as yours, that guy. Saying that, Aunt Xiao's eyes flickered. It's for Rayleigh, too. For Aunt Xiao, Zhang Lu is definitely a dangerous guy. In the past, people who could chase the Roger regiment everywhere were naturally nervous. Especially when the other person is looking at the person next to him. That guy Rayleigh, he's getting old. It should be very troublesome to meet Zhang Lu. Muttering, a trace of worry flashed across Aunt Xiao's face. At the same time, Zhang Lu, as they speak, is traveling through various blocks in the Sabayati archipelago. Give me your names and identities. Walking ahead, Zhang Lu said lightly. The slaves of celestial dragons, but not everyone is qualified to be. Especially this guy, Roswald, likes to collect captain slaves. This also means that the 2 tall guys behind them look unremarkable and embarrassed, but their identities are full-fledged captains. My name is Longbottom, and there is a bounty of 280 million Bailey. It was originally the captain of a small pirate group in New World. Longbottom said in a low voice. My name is Zambo, and I have a bounty of 250 million Bailey. I used to be a captain. Zambo said. Freya's eyes widened, a little surprised. These 2 slaves who were so humiliated in front of celestial dragons were originally captains with such a high bounty. Zhang Lu was not surprised. He knew a long time ago that there are many people in Marine, or in the world, who can do this kind of business. Advertisement. The pirates who have been defeated on the sea, especially the ones with high bounty, will be resold to celestial dragons through secret channels and let them enjoy themselves. For Roswald, who likes to collect captain slaves, such high bounty pirates are simply treasures. It is good. Zhang Lu nodded without showing any other expressions. From now on, they are all his people, and they were pirates before. Obviously, these 2 people still need to be carefully observed. Sir, you just ran into the celestial dragons, aren't you worried at all? Freya reminded nervously. Worry about what? Zhang Lu smiled. But celestial dragons. Freya took a deep breath and said with a complicated expression. He really doesn't understand the officer in front of him, offending celestial dragons, but he'll be in trouble. Hee, don't worry. To trouble me, they still dare not. Zhang Lu said with a light smile. Such a confident and casual tone made Longbottom and Zambo startled. A few people walked through the street and soon reached a new block. Turning his head to look at the number on the tree, he saw the number 24 was engraved on it, and then Zhang Lu looked away. After a while, everyone's footsteps stopped. Longbottom, Zambo's eyes flickered, trembling slightly, Freya's eyes widened, and a smile appeared on Zhang Lu's face. What a coincidence you say. The whole family was met by us. Hearing this, the 3 of them were stunned. Sir, are you saying that this is a relative of those 2 before? Freya was surprised. In front of them, a celestial dragon's wearing a bubble, sitting on a slave, holding a rope in his hand, is slowly moving forward, and the surrounding streets are kneeling. Forget it, don't worry about him. Zhang Lu shook his head and said, stepping forward and continuing to walk. At the same time, on another line intersecting with them, a man with short green hair and 3 knives slung around his waist, holding a wine bottle in his hand, was drinking while walking forward. That guy seems to be one of the supernovas too. I remember, it's the pirate hunter, Zoro, the 3 swordsmen. Freya widened her eyes. Just like you, walking in front of celestial dragons so boldly. 2 different directions, but both are walking towards celestial dragons on the middle street at the same time. This scene also caused the supernovas hiding around to widen their eyes. Is that green-haired guy dying? Also, the other one is Marine. People are not afraid of celestial dragons anymore. Chapter 111 Zoro chasing after. A tense and dignified atmosphere permeated the entire street, and everyone stared at the 3 figures that were constantly approaching, and their expressions changed. Soon, the green-haired Zoro came to the celestial dragons Charles Rose Saint. Seeing that there were civilians who dared to stand in front of him, Saint Charles Rose widened his eyes with an unbelievable expression. Zoro held the bottle and looked at each other suspiciously. What? Do you want to ask for directions? Hearing this stupid question, Saint Charles was stunned, and then pulled the trigger. Boom. The dull gunshots sounded, and the pupils of the hidden supernovas around them all contracted, because they clearly saw the green algae-headed man with his hand on the hilt of the knife on his waist. Hey, I said, what does this guy want to do? Skalakman App said. The long knife was unsheathed at this moment, and Zoro had already evaded a few dodges in front of St. Charles, and was about to swing the knife. Jewelry. Bonnie's eyes widened, he jumped vigorously, rushed out, and threw him to the ground. Street. Charles Ross blinked and looked to the side, the little girl who was crying on the daring man. Did you hit? Why do I feel like I'm avoiding it? Is it an illusion? Since it's dead, forget it. Saying something suspiciously, he turned his head and was about to leave. Celestial Dragons aloof, naturally would not care to offend the civilians he was executed. However, just when he turned his head, Sapporo's saint was stunned again, and a figure was walking towards him. The cloak behind it fluttered in the wind, and the word justice on it was extremely dazzling. The people around were even more wide-eyed, and everyone's eyes were focused on Zhonglu who was walking. That guy, are you courting death? The green algae head was rescued, but no one rescued him. Zoro and Bonnie also focused their eyes on Marine at the moment, and Zoro was stunned when he saw the face of the other. It's him. Is he a Marine? Bonnie had a solemn expression on his face. Whether standing in the camp of pirates or Marine, the guy executed by celestial dragons was pitiful. Bold guy, really one after another. The torch in Chaparos's hand was raised. Little guy from the Roswell family, I advise you to take back the toy in your hand. However, in the next second, when he looked at Marine who was still 10 meters away, he suddenly appeared in front of him. The two faces were facing each other, and the coldness in the other's eyes could even be clearly seen by Saint Chaporos. Then, the man's right hand was a fire gun that escaped him. Advertisement. The right hand exerted a slight force, and the precious fire guns inlaid with various gems turned into pieces of debris and fell down one after another. Cherish the good days you have now. Stupid guy. Zhonglu bent down slightly and whispered in his ear again. Chaporos saint was shocked. Not only did he not respond, but a fearful and trembling expression appeared on his face. Then, in everyone's eyes, Zhonglu stepped past him. Freya, Zambo, and Longbottom followed closely. After a long while, Saint Chaporos reacted and asked in a daze, who is that guy? He couldn't understand this question, but surprisingly, there was not even the slightest anger in his heart, but only fear. Just thinking about that Marine makes me shiver uncontrollably. Unable to figure it out, Chaporos chose not to, and he left here quickly. He's actually fine, and this scene has made all the supernovas hiding in the dark widen their eyes. Then Marine, who is it? AP was surprised. It's not an auspicious omen, the moment the Marine arrives. All the cards are all fierce. Basil Hawkins said in a deep voice. He flicked the suspended card, but the conclusion he came to later caused him to fall into deep silence. Raising his head, Hawkins murmured as he looked at the back of the other party's departure. In his situation, is it a 100% mortality rate? At this time, Zoro was sitting cross-legged on the lawn, touching the sauce on his forehead. With a knife on his waist, is he also a swordsman? Thinking in my heart, Zoro is very curious about Zhonglu. I advise you not to have any thoughts about that guy, pirate hunter. Bonnie sneered. Zoro turned to look at the woman in front of him. Look what, I saved your life. Also, the Marine you're staring at has just defeated the world's largest swordsman, Mihawk. Shouted Bonnie. What did you say? Zoro was shocked and shouted in disbelief. Advertisement. He defeated Hawkeye Mihawk. Bonnie grinned. Although he is a little blurry in the newspaper, I can still recognize him. As a swordsman, don't you know? The #1 swordsman in the world today is the Marine who just passed by celestial dragons. Zoro stood up abruptly, his eyes were sharp, and then he ran without hesitation, chasing after Zhonglu's group in front. And hearing Bonnie's words, Hawkins slowly raised his head. Is it the world's greatest swordsman? No wonder it gives me such a huge sense of oppression. An invincible enemy. Turning sharply, Hawkins left without hesitation. Sir, you're so disrespectful to celestial dragons, is it really okay? Freya said nervously. 3 celestial dragons in a row, 2 beaten, 1 intimidated. This kind of thing, I am afraid that no one will believe it. But his own boss looked like he didn't care. Disrespect. I've been very restrained. Zhonglu smiled, his eyes twinkling. After all, as a Marine, you must be restrained and restrained. But, for Robin's sake, I can stop arresting you for the time being. Rush in front of me rashly, and you can see my identity too. He wouldn't be so gentle with celestial dragons if it wasn't for waiting for some at war. Is there a problem? Zoro took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on Marine in front of him. The breath of the group of people in front of him made him feel that his hair was standing on end. The 2 tall guys standing in front were not simple opponents. Wait for me, it's one of the supernovas, Zoro, the pirate hunter Santo Ryu. Hey, that guy, this Robin's partner, you seem to be called Zoro. You dare to throw yourself into the net, do you want to arrest him here? Zhonglu smiled. You defeated Hawkeye Mihawk. Zambo and Longbottom also turned around, their eyes fixed on Zoro who was approaching them. Freya said in a condensed voice. After a while, Zoro's footsteps slowed down, and his eyes became even more solemn. At this moment, a loud shout came from behind everyone, and then, Freya turned around and saw a green-haired man shouting and chasing after him. Chapter 112 Use this to deal with you. Seeing Zoro who was chasing after him in a hurry, the sauce on his head was too late to wipe, Zhonglu smiled, knowing why the other party came here. If you're talking about Dracula Mihawk. That's good, I did beat him. Zhonglu nodded and said. So, Roranoa Zoro, are you chasing after this specifically for this problem? Zoro froze in place, his eyes widened, full of shock and disbelief. He couldn't believe that the man who easily defeated him with only a small short sword, the world's largest swordsman, would also fail. Moreover, the loser was the one in front of him, who seemed to be unremarkable, without any special marine call. Taking a deep breath, Zoro's expression has become extremely serious and solemn. As that's so, my goal is the world's greatest swordsman. So, at this moment, you are also the biggest goal of my life. His body was slightly bent, and he slowly pulled out the long knife around his waist, holding both in his hands and one in his mouth. After assuming a posture of preparing for battle, Zoro suddenly shouted. Fight me, the world's greatest swordsman. Freya was stunned by this battle. He's here to challenge you, sir. Jang Lu smiled, looked at the man in front of him, and there was a touch of appreciation in his eyes. The weak swing the sword to the weaker, and the strong swing the sword to the stronger. Roar no Zoro, even I have to praise you. You have a lot of courage, but now that I have you, challenging me is just killing myself. Such words did not make Zoro flinch, but his eyes became more stern, and his momentum instantly resembled a crazy beast. Are you very persistent? Jang Lu said softly, with a more serious look in his eyes. Please fight with me, I want to see how high the apex of this world is. Zoro shouted in a deep voice. At the same time, I also want to see how strong the person who defeated Hawkeye is. He murmured in his heart, the light in his eyes was extremely powerful. Even if you sacrifice your life for this, are you willing to do so? Roar no Zoro. Jang Lu's face became solemn, and he asked in a deep voice. To die in battle with the strong is what a swordsman's lifelong pursuit is. Zoro laughed. Advertisement. Then what about breaking the promise with your companion? Jang Lu asked again. He knew very well that the other party had a promise with Luffy. Hearing such words, Zoro's whole body shuddered, hesitation flashed in his eyes, but it quickly turned into firmness. At this moment, I just want to see the vastness of this world. I want to know more, why did you beat that man? Jang Lu's eyes sharpened. I understand what you mean. But your strength at the moment is still not worth my sword. As soon as the words fell, his body suddenly jumped up, and the next second he was standing on the big branch above his head, breaking a branch. Just use this against you. Jang Lu jumped off the big tree, stood in front of Zoro again, and said with a smile. I really look down on people. Zoro gritted his teeth, anger flashing from his eyes. But the next moment, he saw the man in front of him toss a branch that was as long as a long knife, and with a buzzing sound, an inexplicable force was wrapped around the branch. It actually gave him a sense of danger and palpitations. Come here, Roar no Zoro. In view of your devotion to Kendo, and this gesture of desire for the strongest, I'll give you some pointers. Jang Lu laughed. Just pointing. Zoro laughed angrily, this time he came after him specially, and he did everything to challenge. Choke. The long knife shook, and its figure sprinted out in an instant. Standing in front of Zambo, Longbottom's eyes narrowed and he was about to shoot. Get out of the way, this is a battle between us. Jang Lu held a branch and said lightly. Hearing this, the two of them retreated to make way for Zoro, who was rushing over. Let me see your power to defeat the world's greatest swordsman. Zoro yelled, took a few steps to Jang Lu, and jumped up suddenly. His body turned, his waist was strained, and the knife in his right hand roared down instantly, cutting into Jang Lu's neck. The latter turned his wrist, and the branch was lifted like a knife. When? It is unimaginable that the fragile branch collided with Zoro's long knife, making a sound of gold and iron. Zoro's pupils shrank, and he was also shocked by this, but soon his left-handed knife also suddenly slashed. The weapon blocked his first shot, so what about the second shot? But soon, he saw an incredible scene. The opponent seemed to have predicted his attack trajectory in advance, and his footsteps retreated slightly. Advertisement. Shish. The long knife slashed and hit nothing. At the same time, Zoro's eyes glared, his knees bent, and he jumped out suddenly. It's not over yet. He has a third knife. Although the three-sword style is more difficult to cultivate, it is also famous for the madness and invincibility of fighting. The knife light flickered, Zoro blinked and approached Jang Lu again, and the long knife in his mouth instantly drew a trace. However, at this moment, the branch in Jang Lu's right hand lifted again, just a little bit forward. When Zoro stopped there, the branches collided with his blade, and the powerful force made him slide backwards. Can't attack. Between the lightning and flint, three swords in a row made Zoro realize the strength of the opponent in an instant. The terrifying pressure swept over, making his complexion extremely dignified. That's no less than the pressure it was against the Hawkeye Mohawk. And now, it has been a long time since that battle, and he has grown up. Is it the strongest in the world? It's really exciting. Reaching out a hand for his head and tying a turban, Zoro's eyes became even sharper. This is a duel worth his full strength, even his life. The opponent can exert such strength with only one branch. The next second, its figure rushed out again. The figure is like a crazy beast, moving left and right, and then slashing one after another. Jang Lu held a branch and waved it freely, accurately stopping his three long knives one by one. What shocked everyone around was that the branches collided with the blade, which actually emitted fire. And Jang Lu, who was holding a branch, was standing there, barely moving, and Zoro, the three-knife style attacking one after another, was constantly changing his body and attacking. Only to this extent. Use your strongest tricks. Roar no Zoro. Otherwise, your simple tricks, in my eyes, are all flaws. Jang Lu said lightly, the branch in his hand shook and poked forward. When the huge force oscillated, Zoro raised his knife to resist, and his figure was knocked out again. After dragging a long distance on the ground, he gasped heavily. Sweat was oozing from his forehead, and his eyes were dignified. Pressure, the incomparably huge pressure came from the opponent's seemingly casual and relaxed body, but it could crush his spirit. Any of his own attacks seems to be seen through by the other party, and it is of no use at all. This guy is Mihawk with Hawkeye. Completely different power. Chapter 113. Take it if you like it. One word with Dao. Third generation ghost. Famous sword Autumn Water. You have 3 good knives, Roar no Zoro. Jang Lu spit out softly and said the names of the 3 famous knives in the opponent's hand. But the current you are not qualified to use them. This sentence made Zoro's complexion change, and his eyes became fierce. This world is huge, but you're a little bit worse. Just this little bit will make you unable to keep such a good knife, let alone fulfill your promise to that straw hat captain. Jang Lu smiled lightly, his body was a little short, and he assumed an offensive stance. UB************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************ eyes were hideous. Fang was the one who attacked, and now, it was obviously the opponent's turn. His attack was intercepted by the opponent, but what about the opponent? Whether he can block this man's next series of attacks. Just as he was thinking about it, Zhonglu's feet suddenly moved. Its figure seems to have turned into a streamer at this moment, but it has reached Zoro's eyes in an instant. The branches roared out like long knives, piercing the air with a bang, and also pierced Zoro's neck, showing no mercy. Danger. Zoro's pupils shrank, and the pores all over his body popped open at this moment. In a situation of extreme crisis, the conditioned reflex made him swing a long knife. When the knife was blocked, but then, in his eyes, he saw the branch, drawing a purple-red line in the void. With an unpredictable trajectory, it came to him again in an instant and slashed down towards his right arm. Stop it, otherwise, you will die. Zoro's scalp was numb, and he roared in his heart. The opponent's knife and the unpredictable strength made it difficult for him to understand. It is obviously just a branch, but its strength and sharpness are no less than that of a famous sword. When the crisp sound of gold and iron sounded again, and Zoro was shocked by the blow and flew backwards. Intuition like a beast, really a good seedling. I'm interested in you, Roronoa Zoro. Zhonglu grinned, strode forward, and waved the branch in his hand again. Advertisement. The latter raised the knife and continued to resist, the sweat continued to seep out of his forehead, and the cells and muscles in the whole body were even more frantically agitated and contracted at this moment. At this time, Zoro couldn't use any sword moves at all. Under Zhonglu's attack, he could only passively follow his soul, and swing the sword with the most instinctive guidance from the depths of his body. But this feeling stopped him, an attack that he couldn't resist at all. Carrying a sharp breath, the branch pierced through the void, radiating energy, and slashed to the ground. A sharp sword mark appeared and slashed onto the big tree next to it. The tree was cut by the waist and fell to the ground with a click. And Zoro, at this moment, seems to have entered a new realm, and everything around him, his perception of the environment, seems to be clear. The body's instinctive reaction, the reaction speed of the muscles, is even faster. Good, good, good. You're about to wake up. But it's not that far. Zhonglu exclaimed. The branch in his hand is waving faster and faster, and its strength is also increasing. The three knives collided with the opponent, sparks shot everywhere, and the clanging sound continued. Zoro's figure was also retreating, and the ground on both sides was even more devastated. But after a few breaths, Zoro's body still flew out, and he couldn't resist the increasing strength and pressure after all. Whirring. Bending over and gasping for breath, Zoro raised his head and stared at the man in front of him. Give pointers. It's really a pointer. The pressure has brought me into a unique state, and my strength has become stronger. But after stopping, it can't go back to that state again. Use your strongest tricks, otherwise, you won't have any more chances. Zhonglu smiled lightly. He is deliberately guiding the other side, otherwise the difference between the two sides will be able to decide the winner and loser in an instant. It's amazing. Zoro sighed softly. But that's exactly my goal. Grow into a great swordsman that surpasses you. Its body is slightly bent, the three knives are in a unique posture, and the aura on his body also becomes condensed, depressed, dangerous, and crazy. Vaguely, the phantom floated behind it, and the ferocious ghost Chi also rose out. Endure hardships and never tire, this is the way of Asura. A ferocious, terrifying ghost emerged from behind him, his eyes red and glared at Zhonglu. Even if I lose, my heart is still warm. At the same time, Zoro's knees bent slightly and jumped out suddenly. Ashura. Advertisement. Zhonglu grinned. The branch in his hand was held tightly by him and slowly waved up. Judging from the eyes of several people around, Zoro was in front of Zhonglu almost instantly. And at this moment, the branch in Zhonglu's hand waved out. Fast to ultimate, like a streamer that fades in the blink of an eye. At an incredible angle, he avoided the opponent's three long knives, and slammed into his body with an extremely violent momentum. Boom. Zoro at ultimate speed stopped, still maintaining that posture. How can that be? Completely different from Hawkeye Mahawk's battle, the opponent's weapon was completely bizarrely avoided his own attack, and then directly hit the body. He had never heard of such a sword technique. Real swordsmanship, every swing is a sword move. Learn, Roronoa Zoro. Zhonglu let out a low voice, then took back the branch in his hand and left it casually aside. Cough, cough, cough. You will teach a runaway beast. Zhonglu grinned, looking at the man in front of him who had firm eyes and iron will, even though his whole body had been shattered, but he still insisted on the man who didn't want to fall. At the last shot, the other party obviously stopped his hand, otherwise the knife would be enough to split himself in half. The sudden words caused Freya, Zambo, and Longbottom to widen their eyes. Zoro was even more stunned, but soon he grinned, his eyes burning hot. Zoro still maintained that posture, but the scars on his body were clearly revealed, a mark like a knife cut, spreading from his right shoulder to his left abdomen. Practice the swordsmanship to become the world's greatest swordsman. Roronoa Zoro, your swordsmanship is still far from the top of the world. Zhonglu laughed out loud. It's a shame for me to show mercy like this. Even if I really become your disciple, the title of the world's largest swordsman, I will definitely not be polite. You have a long future ahead of you, and I am delighted by your potential. Then take it, if you have the ability and you like it. Follow me to practice. Would you like to be my disciple? Gritting his teeth, Zoro looked ugly. Chapter 114 Underground Auction. Roronoa Zoro. This young man who was born in Shimotsuki village, with the ideal of becoming the world's greatest swordsman, stepped into the sea with a will stronger than steel and a fearless heart. He works hard enough and has faith. Such a guy naturally made Zhonglu admired, and made him love talents even more. In the original book, the other party eventually became a disciple of Hakai Mahawk. After 2 years of his teaching, his strength was transformed. After entering the new world, he was almost unbeaten. At this time, Zhonglu was thinking of accepting the other party as his apprentice and cut off the eagle-eyed Hu. After a moment, yes, what a tempting proposal. With the guidance of a guy like you, you should be able to become stronger in a very short time. Zoro grinned and sighed. He returned the 3 knives to their sheaths, but his expression turned regretful. But unfortunately, I still have an important journey that is not over. I can only live up to your kindness. After a pause, his tone was solemn and his expression serious. But even without your teaching, I will definitely go to the top of the world. Then, Zoro turned around without hesitation and strode away from here. Zhonglu's expression remained unchanged, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth when he looked at the other person's back. We'll see you again. Then, he waved his hand and greeted the 3 of Freya aside. Gone. Where are you going? Freya asked curiously. Zambo and Longbottom followed closely behind, one on the left and one on the right like 2 iron towers. Underground auction house. There, I can see who I want to see. Zhonglu smiled lightly. A group of people quickly passed through the jungle and disappeared here. Zoro, who turned and left, had a complicated expression on his face. Completely different pressure from Mahawk. And offered to teach me to practice. What a rare opportunity. In East Blue Shimotsuki village, under the guidance of his master Koshiro, he entered the gate of Kendo, and his strength has been improving. But as the world you see becomes wider and stronger, and the stronger you encounter, you can naturally feel that what you have learned is not enough. Advertisement. This is not to say that Master Koshiro's strength is weak, but some of the profound aspects are difficult to comprehend if no one personally teaches them. The improvement of strength is naturally limited. Under such circumstances, with a strong person like Zhonglu as his teacher, if he is taught carefully, his strength will inevitably improve by leaps and bounds. I missed it, but it's not a pity. Compared to this opportunity, they are more important. Sighing softly, the regretful expression on Zoro's face also dissipated. His mood gradually calmed down, and he forgot the defeat in the battle just now. Instead, he began to recall and summarize the lessons learned in this battle. That man can accurately predict my every attack. Therefore avoid it. Although he only used a branch, he could strangely burst out with a sharpness that was not inferior to that of a sword. Even an extremely restrained slash has the terrifying power of cutting the ground in the aftermath of the tree. Recalling the battle just now, Zoro's expression became more and more solemn. The battle with Mahawk gave him an insight into the vastness of the world. The battle with Zhonglu gave him insight into different dimensions. Every move is a big move. Aren't you sticking to sword moves? Muttering, Zoro recalled again the strange state he had just entered. Can clearly see the opponent's attack, the body instinctively swings the knife to resist. At that moment, his body seems to be controlled by the soul hidden in the depths. But he was very clear that the person who wielded the knife was himself. He definitely has a power that I don't understand. It is precisely because of this that we can enter such a state under the traction of the chi machine. Zoro sighed again. The opportunity to get the guidance of the world's first is of course precious. But he refused, for the sake of his companions, and for the journey to follow. And only to refuse. This is him, Roronoa Zoro. Luffy, you will definitely become the pirate king. And I will definitely become the world's greatest swordsman. Must. Zoro's eyes were firm and he said in a low voice. And in a place he couldn't see, a figure was watching him silently. Do you like this guy? Muttering, the figure took a step forward, and ripples of air surged on the ground, and the figure disappeared like a teleportation. Underground auctions are blatantly evil places. Let's go in like this, is it really okay? Sir. Advertisement. On the way to the underground auction, Freya said speechlessly. She really doesn't understand the number of ways of her own boss. Zhang Lu didn't respond, but took off the cloak of justice behind him and handed it to Freya, grinning. That way no one will know, I'm Marine. And you, all along, never wore Marine's garb. In order to maintain her charm, always attract and catch the attention of her superiors, Freya was wearing a close-fitting training suit at this time, which perfectly outlined her perfect figure. He wears glasses on his nose, a few strands of broken hair float down his forehead, and his hair is simply tied into a ponytail, looking intellectual and mature. However, at a young age, it can show its immature face. But in that place, sir, your words will cause a lot of disputes. Freya sighed. But Zhang Lu obviously didn't listen. Behind him, Zanbu and Longbottom were like two sculptures, not saying a word at all. After half an hour, the group came to the gate of the auction house. Looking up at the sign on the door, Zhang Lu smiled. Brother Doflamingo's business really exists everywhere. Freya muttered. This unique logo represents Doflamingo, one of the Shichibukai, that is, the Don Quixote family. Ha ha, after all, he is the king of the underground world. He doesn't get involved in this kind of business, and it doesn't make sense. Zhang Lu smiled lightly. Then, they pushed open the door and walked in. The scene in front of him was dark at first, and then brightened up. In the auditorium, there were people sitting in twos and threes. This is the Sabayati archipelago, the most intricate place of the various forces. There are pirates, nobles, and some local gangsters. But at the same time, it is also the quietest place. Because the person sitting in the front row is the famous celestial dragons. And the so-called underground auction house, the auction place, is also a wide variety. Even the secret treasures in the sea, the devil fruit that humans eat will have incredible abilities, there will be here. Another mysterious item is human. Yes, all kinds of humans will be auctioned here, sold to nobles as playthings, slaves. This kind of business is just the meaning of the existence of the underground auction market, and it is also an opportunity to obtain huge profits. The front row is the celestial dragons. And not far from us, there are some pirates. No, not just pirates. Freya said in a low voice, her face suddenly condensed, and she said in surprise. They are pirate supernovas in this batch. Chapter 115 The world is like this. With a smile on his face, Zhang Lu sat in the back row, found a comfortable position, and was also scanning the people in the audience below. The supernova Freya was talking about, he soon saw it. Trafalgar Law with a bounty of 200 million Bailey, nicknamed the Surgeon of Death. Seemingly aware of his gaze, Luo turned his head and glanced at them. When he saw Zhang Lu, he was slightly taken aback and frowned, feeling a little familiar. But soon, he looked back again. Is it another group of pirates? The two tall guys beside him have too much pirate aura, Luo. The companion beside me said in a low voice. It looks familiar, but I can't remember who it is. Luo said in a deep voice. He vaguely felt that this man should be very important, but he didn't have any impression, and then fell into contemplation, trying to remember. And the people standing in the back are Eustace Kid with the highest bounty among these supernovas. Compared to the Straw Hat Boy Luffy, this guy is famous for his viciousness, killing many civilians, and is a notorious criminal. Freya's voice rang in her ears. Zhang Lu turned his head and glanced at Eustace Kid standing there. His movements were undisguised, and he seemed very direct and rude, which was naturally noticed by Kid's group. That guy is looking at you, Kid. Hira said in a low voice. Hey, it looks like you've recognized us. Is it also a pirate? Kid grinned, his eyes fixed on Zhang Lu viciously, his right hand on his neck, slowly passing by. But in the next second, the two captain-level subordinates next to Zhang Lu also turned their heads, and both pairs of eyes were fixed on him. The icy, cold, suffocating pressure swept over in an instant, making Kid startled slightly, and the ease in his eyes also dissipated. These two guys are very imposing. Hira reminded in a deep voice. Looks like there's another group of bad guys here. It's getting more and more interesting, this auction. Kid grinned and looked away. At the same time, beside Zhang Lu, Longbottom spoke in a deep voice. Would you like to kill him? Hee, mere newcomers, don't pay too much attention. Zhang Lu smiled. For Kid's threatening actions just now, he didn't care at all. Now is not the time to clean them up. The smile on his face dissipated, his voice also calmed down, his eyes suddenly turned, and he looked at the door behind him again. The door of the auction house was quietly opened again, and then a group of people walked in. The woman in the middle had orange hair, and on the sides were a human-shaped deer and a man with curly eyebrows in a black suit. It's the Straw Hat Boys. Advertisement. Freya whispered. Zhang Lu smiled, then looked down again. It's going to be a good show. After a pause, he looked at the human being who was taken from behind the scenes to the front desk, tied with chains and collars, the smile on his face disappeared, and his tone became low. Look at the ugly side of this world. Freya was startled, but quickly understood what her superior said. On the auction floor, when humans are brought up, a fierce competition begins. I'll give 500,000, 700,000, 800,000. In the auditorium, all kinds of nobles are making crazy bids for the human beings who are placed in front of people on the stage. This is an auction of human slaves. Freya's face changed drastically. Why, haven't you been to this dirty, dark place? Zhang Lu said lightly. What if I tell everything here and the government is involved as well? Freya's whole body trembled, her eyes widened. How is that possible? How can you see the dark corners of the world when you stand where the light shines? Freya. However, it is understandable that naval headquarters is indeed the position closest to justice. Jang Lu said slowly. One auction was completed, and soon another was replaced. Unlike the previous pirates, this time it was a shivering woman who appeared on the auction stage. Different identities and different ethnic groups have different prices here. Some guys with special preferences, the underground auction is simply their paradise. The dull voice entered Freya's ears, causing her heart to be in a huge shock. With a trembling body, he turned his head and looked at Zambo and Longbottom beside him. Aren't you all surprised? Freya trembled. She noticed that there was no expression on the faces of these two people, as if everything was normal. It is through this process that we fell into the hands of celestial dragons. Longbottom said lightly. The world is like this. Praise the sermon. Freya was stunned, staring blankly at everything in front of her, watching the excitement of the auction, watching the trembling and fear of the woman on the stage. At this moment, she just realized that people's destiny, joys and sorrows are not the same. Ha 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 ha. Well said, the world is like this. Jang Lu laughed, but soon his voice became cold again. But it shouldn't be. Advertisement. Afterwards, the group fell silent, watching all this quietly. Behind them, Nami and his group were also in a huge shock. They could not imagine that the trade of human beings and the slave trade really existed. Under the hustle and bustle of Sabayati, there is still such a dark and dirty place hidden. What's even more incredible is that they even saw many nobles and even government personnel here. Time continued to pass, and everything in the auction hall was proceeding in an orderly manner. Can we save them? Even if the pirates are heinous, they deserve to be like this, but those innocent people, they shouldn't. Freya said with a trembling voice. Jang Lu raised his eyebrows, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Do you want to save them? Think. Freya took a deep breath and said in a deep voice. Then do you know that you disturbed this place and disturbed this group of nobles? Will it be Marine siege? Jang Lu grinned. What? Freya trembled all over, her eyes widened, her mind was in shock. Does Marine even participate in this kind of thing? Her worldview was completely subverted at this moment. Let's watch the show, Freya. Jang Lu was stunned, looked up at the female assistant in front of him, and there was a light in his eyes. How can you save the world? But if you can't even save these innocent people in front of you? Jang Lu said lightly. What about you? You are not qualified to save people right now. I want to save this crazy world. The next second, she stood up suddenly. Freya said in surprise. Freya said suddenly, staring at the officer in front of her with burning eyes. Then, his figure stood up slowly, and as he stood up, Zanbu and Longbottom also stood up suddenly. Ha 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 ha, rescue? Freya asked in a deep voice. Jang Lu laughed. Freya, it seems that I need to re-examine you. What are you going to do? Chapter 116. A good show is on the stage. But you are Marine. Moreover, there are so many nobles here, and people from the government are involved. Freya wrote. Women like you have the courage to face them. And what about me? Jang Lu smiled. How are you going to save them? Freya widened her eyes. It's easy. Buy it all. Jang Lu laughed loudly, and then, with a gesture of his right hand, he shouted aloud. 1 million. The sound spread throughout the audience, and all of a sudden, many people turned their heads and looked at him, their eyes surprised and unbelievable. 1 million. On the stage, the host opened his mouth and shouted loudly. But he responded quickly, turning his head to glance at the woman dressed as a maid next to him, and the smile on his face became even more prosperous. Because this servant was originally worth 400,000 to 500,000 Baileys, and now the auction price has almost doubled. This is a great thing. 1 million. Is there anything higher? If not, this maid belongs to this Mr. Pirate. The host asked with a smile. The audience was quiet, and no one quoted a higher price. A mere human maid is not worth 1 million Bailey. Then, she belongs to this guest. Beautiful face, perfect figure, if this gentleman brings it home, he can clean up, warm the bed, and have some unique hobbies. It's really something that Ultimate enjoys. The host knocked down the auction hammer and said with a big laugh. I thought you were going to grab it directly. Freya blinked and said in astonishment. Do I look like such a brainless person? Jang Lu smiled. But do you have money? Freya wondered again. I do not have. But someone has. Jang Lu smiled lightly. Freya showed a blank expression. And his behavior just now was noticed by some people hiding here. It's him. I didn't expect that he is actually on this island now, and he also appeared in such an auction. On a seat in the corner, two figures wrapped in black robes communicated in a low voice. Since we met, it's impossible to say hello without saying hello. Let's go say hello, Lucci. One of them laughed. Advertisement. After all, he is our boss. Another figure sitting there also nodded. Then, the two got up and walked towards where Jang Lu was. It's that uncle. At the same time, Nami's group also saw him. It's the uncle that Robin knew, and I saw it in Magic Valley Town. Chopper said. Do you know him? The two guys next to him don't seem to be easy to deal with. Starfish Papagu said solemnly. Whether it's Zambo or Longbottom, it doesn't look simple, and the condensed aura is extremely difficult to provoke. Is he also a pirate? Sanji wondered. Go say hello. If he is a pirate, he should be rich. Nami rolled his eyes and said with a smile. Also, we're going to save Kami. He seems to be Roger's elder, so he should do his part too. The group quickly made up their minds and prepared to walk towards Zhonglu. But at this moment, they saw two figures in black robes approaching Zhonglu, and they couldn't help but stop. What's even more strange is that when the two figures saw them, they also turned their heads, revealing two hideous grimace masks. Mask. Nami was startled. At the same time, an icy and dangerous feeling came to my mind. Be careful. Sanji's expression changed, and he stood in front of him, staring solemnly at the two people in front of him. The atmosphere seemed to be stagnant at this moment, and the two people in front of them also stopped, and under the two masks, their eyes were cold and cold. But soon, the two turned their heads and continued to walk towards Zhonglu. These two guys. Sanji let out a breath, and his face changed. Very dangerous. Nami looked puzzled. Do we know them? I don't know, but the breath on them gives me a very familiar feeling. Sanji said solemnly. Everyone's heart was heavy, and their attempts to go to say hello to Zhonglu were also interrupted. The form of this auction seems to be more complicated than they imagined. At the same time, beside Zhonglu, two figures in black robes and masks also sat down slowly. You are? Freya blinked and asked suspiciously. One of them turned around, but ignored her and looked at Zhonglu. I'm number 5. It's a coincidence to see you here. Zhonglu laughed. I saw a newspaper not too long ago that you might need. Number 5 said in a deep voice, then took out the folded newspaper from his arms and handed it to Zhonglu. Advertisement. Then, farewell. The person who said him on number 3 will join us here, and it should be coming soon. When the words fell, number 5 got up and left, while the other stood up and bowed to show respect, and then hurried away. Number 3. Zhonglu's eyes flashed and he murmured. Number 3 is naturally Doflamingo, and contact with him is naturally the task at hand. It seems that these guys in my team have already started contact with each other. This is a good sign, much better than he expected. Then, he unfolded the newspaper folded in his hand, and after scanning it once, his eyes instantly sharpened. What's wrong? Freya asked. Naturally, she would not ask more about the so-called conversation with number 5 just now. In fact, after being by Zhonglu's side for so long, she has long known that this officer has many secrets and even his secret actions. Marine has announced the execution date for Firefist Ace. Zhonglu said lightly. What? Freya was shocked. Doesn't that mean? Yes, it means that the war is coming soon. Zhonglu laughed. Just when the two were about to continue their conversation, the door opened again, and celestial dragons with a bubble above their heads slowly came in while sitting on the slave. The auction venue was quiet, and no one dared to make a noise at this moment. In this way, in the eyes of everyone, Charles Rose walked all the way to the front row and sat with his father and sister. Then, the auction continues. Soon after, the Murloc Kami was brought up. It was also at this moment that the atmosphere in the audience reached the highest level, and everyone was in admiration. Freya clenched her fists with anger in her eyes. That's right, our next lot is the Murlocs. Then, he had come to find Rayleigh, but in such a situation, what he had witnessed made his heart up and down, blocked by something inexplicable. After seeing the two figures in the field, Nami and the others exclaimed in surprise. Zhonglu also grinned and snorted softly. Such a high price made many people stop abruptly in an instant, and the smile on Nami's face disappeared instantly, making it difficult to look. Suddenly, everyone saw it too. 500 million. The host shouted excitedly. Zhonglu was expressionless, watching all this quietly. Boom. The auction starts and everyone is bidding. Charles Rose raised his hand and shouted with a smile. It's a good show. With a deafening explosion, the gate of the auction hall was torn apart, and two figures slammed open the gate and rushed in. Everyone is cheering. Such a slave is the dream of everyone in the world. Luffy. Chapter 117 I finally met. A classic scene is coming. Zhonglu sat there quietly watching the scene. This also means that his old rival will appear. Young people are energetic. The scene in the field turned extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, St. Charles shot and hit Xiaoba, which completely angered Luffy, the Straw Hat Boy. Then, there was an iron fist from that hockey. The audience shook, and then the other members of the Straw Hats also arrived. He hit celestial dragons. This is a big trouble. Admiral is coming. Run. A series of terrified voices came out, and the entire auction venue was in chaos in an instant. Sir, there's going to be chaos here. Freya said nervously. Zhonglu nodded. He was different from the Straw Hat Boy. He took care of the celestial dragons. Those guys wouldn't take any action unless it was necessary. But Luffy is different. When such an incident occurs, it is conceivable that the Sabayati archipelago will usher in the suppression of marine pirates on the entire island will face a great crisis. Glancing at the audience, the two people sitting in the corner, number 5, had disappeared for some time. The auction venue has been surrounded by marine, as it has been before. Freya whispered again. It seems that they have all learned the news of the person here. Zhonglu smiled lightly. That, who is it? Freya was stunned. A legend. Zhonglu said. Meanwhile, naval headquarters, in Garp's offices. Garp Vice Admiral, at the auction venue of Sabayati Archipelago, we noticed the figure of the suspected legend. The officer said solemnly. Ha 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 ha, really? That must be him. We have also noticed him at the Sabayati Archipelago several times over the years. Garp laughed. If it's really that person, should we take action? The officer asked. Never mind him, Marine doesn't have the time to deal with two legends at the same time. Garp rode. Also, we were also in the auction and noticed Jang Lu Admiral. The officer said again. Jang Lu. Garp's expression changed slightly, and the smile on his face disappeared instantly. It's that guys. What will happen next is unpredictable. At this moment, the officer said again. The Straw Hat guys also fought celestial dragons just now, and the news should have reached Mariajoy by now. Advertisement. What did you say? Garp's expression changed drastically. Sabayati Archipelago, auction venue, backstage. Mr. Giant, it's really lively outside. The gray-haired man with glasses slowly stood up and said with a smile. Go out and have a look. Sizing the wallet in his hand, Rayleigh smiled. I originally wanted to rob the guy who bought me, but it seems that I have no chance. The giant behind him slowly stood up and said with a blank face, you really are a bad old man. Ha 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 ha. Rayleigh burst out laughing and stepped out. Outside, in the auditorium. The originally crowded place became empty in the blink of an eye, and the Straw Hats were fighting with the guards on the field. Sir, are we going to take action? This place has been completely messed up by pirates. Freya stood up and said nervously. The Straw Hat Pirates, the Kid Pirates, and the Heart Pirates of Trafalgar Law. Looking at the chaotic scene in the field, Jang Lu slowly stood up. It's really messed up. However, there are people on the field who are experiencing fear and despair. As soon as he finished speaking, his figure had already walked out and walked towards the fish man Kami on the auction table. Sir. Freya was taken aback. She understood what her own boss was going to do. The other party's target was not a pirate, but the Murloc who was kidnapped and auctioned off. It's him. Seeing Jang Lu's actions, Kid Luo's eyes shrank at this moment. Jang Lu. Zoro's eyes narrowed, and his eyes instantly fixed on the man in the field. Clatter. Following his steps, an inexplicable domineering aura suddenly swept across the four directions. It also caused the complexion of everyone present to change suddenly. Buzz. The domineering aura spread to the entire auction venue, as if layers of ripples were swaying. This breath seemed to be extremely precise, and the guards involved were all wide-eyed, the weapons in their hands fell, and they fell to the ground with a thud. Celestial dragons, who had just stood up in the front row, couldn't hold on for a second, and they lost consciousness. Da 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 da. Jang Lu walked forward step by step, as if stepping on everyone's heart, making them look solemn and under great pressure. Such an aura. Kid's pupils contracted, fine sweat oozes from his forehead, his whole body was shaking, and he was trying his best to deal with the breath. This guy. Trafalgar Law's complexion changed dramatically, and a picture flashed across his mind. It was the past that he didn't want to recall. In a certain room of that family, there used to be a photo of this man. He also asked Corazon about the identity of this man, and the latter answered with a smile on his face. You said Jang Lu. He is the closest person to me besides my parents and Dover. Even now Dover, seeing this man, will become very good. Advertisement. If you can see him one day, you must mention my name, and lead me to worship, admire, and respect him. The voice of the words echoed in his mind, making Luo's expression constantly changing. Luo, what's wrong with you? Babo next to him asked in surprise. That man is Jang Lu. Marine ex-admiral, Day Tiger Jang Lu. Luo Chen Sheng said, his face was dignified, and his eyes were staring at each other. In Corazon's words, Jang Lu was his closest person, and he was also a mentor who taught him, and was deeply respected by him. Jang Lu, you are here too. Robin exclaimed in surprise. Robin, you are in a big trouble. Jang Lu smiled and turned his head. Run away. Otherwise, next, even you and I will become enemies. Robin's expression changed slightly at his words, but she soon grinned. I do not believe. This charming look can only be shown in front of Jang Lu. It's really helpless. Jang Lu shook his head and stepped onto the auction table. What is he going to do? Luffy exclaimed. As everyone could see, Jang Lu stepped in front of Kami. Don't be afraid, don't worry. I'll save you right away. The gentle words and the smile on her face made Kami startled for a moment, and the fear in her heart was greatly reduced, and she stared at the man in front of her. Then, she saw that the other party stretched out her fingers and clamped the collar around her neck. Then, apply a little force. Crack. The collar was easily broken in two, and then was thrown aside by the man. Boom. The explosion sounded, and Kami also jumped down. You're free. Let's go. Jang Lu smiled lightly. Thank you. Kami was stunned for a moment, then nodded heavily, and ran off the auction table excitedly. In the next second, Jang Lu's eyes narrowed and he looked at the backstage curtain of the auction house. The walls were torn apart like paper, and two figures, one large and one small, appeared in the eyes of everyone present. Buzz. With the same momentum as Jang Lu before, it swept out and swept the entire auction hall. Ha, finally see you again. Rayleigh. Jang Lu grinned, his eyes filled with fighting spirit. Chapter 118 Attack on Straw Hat Crew. What a mess. A soft sigh sounded, and following the huge figure appeared a man with gray hair and glasses. Everyone's eyes widened, looking at Jang Lu on the auction table, and the old man walking out. The momentum on the two men shocked them. This old man, shouldn't it be? Luo's eyes changed again, staring at the old man who walked out. See you again, Jang Lu. The old voice, with a touch of solemnity, sounded solemnly. Then, Rayleigh glanced down and saw Luffy and the straw hat on his head at a glance, with a smile at the corner of his mouth. This straw hat suits you very well. Straw Hat Luffy, I've long wanted to meet you. Luffy's eyes widened, just about to say something. Now is not the time for you to reminisce. Pluton Rayleigh. Zhang Lu said lightly. Yeah, the surroundings are already surrounded by Marines. With you as Marine, it's a troublesome situation. Rayleigh said with a smile. Why don't you let us go because of our past relationship? Zhang Lu stared at Rayleigh and suddenly grinned. Do you think this is possible? Our affection will only arouse the irrepressible fighting spirit towards you. Rayleigh's face became solemn and shook his head. That's a pity. At this moment, the phone bug in Zhang Lu's arms also rang. Blue blue blue. He narrowed his eyes slightly and took it out of his arms. Rayleigh was about to walk forward, but was snorted by Zhang Lu. Don't act rashly, Pluton, Rayleigh. Why don't you be considerate of me, a retired old man? But I never thought of fighting you. Rayleigh said helplessly, but his eyes were full of alertness. It can be said that facing anyone in Marine, he is sure that there will be no huge disputes and battles, but it is impossible to face this person. The gap between the two sides was too great. At this time, the phone bug in Zhang Lu's hand was also connected. Hey, Sengoku, Zhang Lu said softly. Zhang Lu, is there a turmoil in the auction house? Sengoku's serious voice came. If you're talking about a group of daring pirates who fought celestial dragons. Zhang Lu said, looked at the Straw Hat Boys and grinned. Advertisement. So yes, the impact of this matter is very bad and should be dealt with as soon as possible. Also, Kizaru has already left. YF2F. These daring pirates must be dealt with. Sengoku's voice was cold and he shouted loudly. No problem. Zhang Lu smiled lightly. Afterwards, the phone bug hung up, his eyes swept over the Straw Hat Boys, and then looked at Kid, Luo and the others. You heard that too, didn't you? The daring pirates dare to hurt celestial dragons. It's really unforgivable. Luo's complexion changed, and he quickly turned around. Come on. Kid grinned, just a colonel. And Rayleigh's complexion changed suddenly, and immediately shouted to the Straw Hat Boy, come on. This guy is about to start. Robin's expression also changed slightly. Let's go, Luffy, Zhang Lu is going to shoot. Freya walked quickly to the auction table, unfolded the justice cloak in her hand, and put it on Zhang Lu's back. The white cloak of justice fluttered in the wind, and the word justice was extremely dazzling in the eyes of everyone. Have you all seen it? I am the righteous Marine now. Pirates full of sin, don't even think about escaping. Zhang Lu grinned. In the auditorium below, Luo's group and the Straw Hat Boys group were all rushing towards the outside. As soon as the voice fell, Zhang Lu's figure moved instantly. The gust of wind stirred, and his figure roared like a streamer, and in an instant, it was behind Luffy. Straw Hat Luffy, you are the culprit, let's start with you. Zhang Lu said softly. What? Zoro's complexion changed suddenly, and Robin's pretty face was full of dignified colors. Luffy, be careful, Nami yelled. But Zhang Lu's speed was as fast as ultimate, and in almost an instant, he crossed the distance of 100 meters and grabbed the opponent's head with his right hand. With his back to Zhang Lu, Luffy was running, and when he felt the movement behind him, he turned around quickly. What caught his eye was a big hand, which quickly enlarged in his eyes. Boom. Without a chance to react, his face was grabbed by Zhang Lu's big hand. Let me see your ability. Companions of Robin. Zhang Lu lifted Luffy up and said lightly. Ah, let me go. Advertisement. Luffy screamed and struggled, but the big hand held him tightly like a hoop, and his face was deformed at the moment. Damn it. As soon as Zoro gritted his teeth, he pulled out all 3 knives, and in a flash, he arrived in front of Zhang Lu. Although it is clear in their hearts that they cannot be opponents of the other party, they still have to make a move in the face of this scene. Oh, Zhang Lu's eyes moved, and his right hand turned sharply, aiming Luffy at Zoro. The momentum of the latter rushing up was stagnant for a moment, and the 3 knives swung in his hand stopped abruptly. Let go of Luffy. On the other side, Sanji kicked. Zhang Lu turned around and kicked out the same kick, but it came first, hitting his abdomen with precision, and kicking him out instantly, smashing a large chair like a cannonball. After doing such a big thing, you can't escape. Zhang Lu said lightly. At this moment, in the eyes of Straw Hat crew, he was undoubtedly extremely terrifying. Let go of me, damn it. Luffy was still screaming, trying to pull his head out of his hands, his neck continuously elongated and deformed, but to no avail. Hey, Zhang Lu, are you kidding me? They are my companions. Robin yelled, his face slightly changed. What do you think? Zhang Lu grinned. The next second, his right hand suddenly pressed towards the ground. Boom. The ground exploded, Luffy's head was slammed into the steps with a bang, and stone chips flew. This guy, if you really escape, Marine's dignity will fall to the ground. Do you think you can still leave this island? This time, the target is Zoro with 3 long knives. Where is the holy place? Beat the celestial dragons with recklessness. Robin, Usopp, Sanji who got back up from the smashed chair, Zoro with a dignified expression, all of them looked extremely difficult to see at this moment. The voice fell, and his figure suddenly moved again. Zhang Lu smiled lightly. Everyone changed color at this moment. The Straw Hat Boy Luffy, who offered a bounty of 300 million yuan, seemed to have no resistance in Zhang Lu's hands. Roronoa. Zoro, I never joke with people. Kid's pupils contracted and his heart shook. Facing the Straw Hats, Jang Lu said lightly. This is the Saadi archipelago, not far from naval headquarters, Marineford. It's your turn. Seeing this scene, he no longer hesitated, turned around and ran towards the door. Chapter 119. Who cares if they live or die? Zoro's complexion changed drastically, his eyes met, and the terrifying sense of oppression swept over again. This unique pressure cannot be described in words. It seems that the moment you face each other, you will feel trembling all over. Even a shot requires a lot of courage to instigate it. Buzz. Jang Lu moved, and the dust rolled on the ground. His figure jumped up in an instant, and when he arrived in front of Zoro, the speed was unbelievable. He clenched his right hand and slammed it down. So fast. Zoro's pupils shrank, and he only had time to block the 3 knives in front of him to defend against the punch. This time, he didn't even draw the knife. But the pressure is even greater than using branches. Is this guy serious? A series of thoughts flashed in his heart, and at this moment, Zoro felt his scalp tingle. Boom. A dull collision sounded, and Zoro's body was smashed and flew out, also smashing a series of chairs. Green algae head. Zoro. Sanji, Luffy, who pulled his head from the ground, yelled at this moment. Too weak. It really disappointed me, to have such a reputation in this world, but only this strength. Jang Lu spoke lightly, his body rising with momentum. He just stood there quietly, making everyone tremble. You are no longer qualified to go on. Pirates. Suddenly, Jang Lu's eyes widened. Buzz. Conqueror's haki swept out, cracks appeared on the wall, and the Straw Hats and his gang trembled in fear. So Haki, where is this marine? The giant said solemnly, and then he looked at the old man in front of him. Besides, old man, aren't you going to take action? You seem to know the Straw Hat boy. Rayleigh's eyes were solemn and he sighed softly. I really don't want to have any conflict with this guy. He's a lunatic. But, after a pause, Rayleigh's eyes sharpened. The seedlings of the new era should not be cut off like this. He couldn't understand Jang Lu's mind, let alone his attitude towards the Straw Hats. This simple battle, although not fully committed, is more like playing. But this kind of thing, don't dare to gamble. Accidentally, the Straw Hat boys die here, but it's not good. The mouth is shouting to become the Pirate King. Advertisement. With that straw hat again. Jang Lu's voice came out again, causing Luffy's eyes to be solemn and his whole body to be shocked. He instantly entered second gear and billows of smoke came out. So, the strong wind swept through again, and Jang Lu's figure flew out, heading straight for Luffy. Do you know what One Piece means? Luffy's eyes widened, and his right fist suddenly swung forward. Boom. The two fists collided with each other, their eyes were facing each other, and the rolling and powerful momentum was oscillating towards the surroundings. Meaning, I will be disgusted by me. Jang Lu snorted coldly, and his right fist suddenly became stronger. Boom. Luffy screamed and was knocked out again, hitting the wall in the distance. As soon as he moved, he was about to walk towards Usopp, who was shaking all over not far away. But at this moment, a violent and domineering aura rose from behind. It's time to stop, Jang Lu. Rayleigh's low voice sounded. Shooting a younger generation is not in line with your identity. The voice fell, and his figure suddenly disappeared. Jang Lu turned around suddenly, and the long knife around his waist suddenly came out of its sheath. The next second, the knife light flashed and collided fiercely. When a wave of air rolled over, and everything in the auction house was set off by a huge impact, and the gust of wind surged out at this moment. I'll block him, you get out of here now, Straw Hat crew. Rayleigh shouted. Nami, Robin and others reacted quickly and ran away. Can't hold back, Rayleigh, I wanted to deal with you in the end. Jang Lu grinned. Stop joking, Jang Lu, you don't have any murderous aura about you. In other words, you didn't even think about taking a real shot at them. Rayleigh said coldly, his eyes extremely sharp. The goal is from the beginning, it's me. Hearing this, Jang Lu retracted the knife, took a step back, and then stepped forward and waved the knife again. When the two knives collided again, and the mighty sword energy shot out, directly cutting a large gap in the ceiling of the auction hall. Stone chips flew, and the roof began to fall. Dangerous guy like you, Marine has been letting it go. Isn't it a pity? Jang Lu grinned. Only a lunatic like you would think of attacking me. Advertisement. Rayleigh said solemnly. The two long knives collided continuously, and the aftermath of the sword chi oscillated out, and the walls of the auction venue were cut into cracks. The terrifying aura is also spreading to the quartet at this moment. The Straw Hats even ran wildly, but after a while, they ran out of the auction venue. But what greeted them was Marine, who was densely packed and had completely surrounded the place. Did you escape? The Straw Hat is in charge. Face that man. Luo said in surprise. Almost died. Luffy cried out with a look of fear. Still think of a way, how to escape from the siege of these guys in front of you. Kid sneered. At this moment, the auction venue behind them suddenly burst into a gleam of light, followed by a bang. The entire venue building was torn apart, twisted and collapsed. The eyes of the three supernovas contracted, and their hearts were shocked. Who are they? The surrounding Marines were also very surprised, looking at the center with a solemn expression. The smoke and dust dissipated, and in the open space in the center of the venue, two figures collided with long knives and were fighting. It's Jang Lu Admiral, someone shouted. One more person. It's Pluton Rayleigh, once the vice captain of One Piece Roger. If Tianlong was injured or even killed in the battle between the two, then the trouble would be big. The head of the school official has a solemn expression. I knew that these two would definitely fight. Zhang Lu grinned, his eyes suddenly sharpened. The long knife in his hand was suddenly lifted and slashed down again. Do you really want to fight me here? Who cares if they live or die? Rayleigh's eyes were solemn, and he raised his knife to resist. That said, he could strike at any moment, threatening Marine with the lives of celestial dragons. Mere celestial dragons. At this moment, Rayleigh stared at Zhang Lu. But there are celestial dragons on the field. Threat me, Rayleigh. At this moment, the three celestial dragons collapsed behind him, facing a fatal crisis at any time. That's not what you, Roger's deputy, should say. Marine was also shocked at this moment. As your Marine, keeping the celestial dragons safe seems to be what you should do now. You're a lunatic. Thinking of this, he immediately had a headache. Chapter 120. You can't escape this battle. Boom. The long knives collided, and circles of ripples quickly spread out towards the surroundings, and the sawdust on the ground was rolled up. The invisible shock wave completely emptied everything around. Whirring, whirring. The wind was howling, and the auction venue had long since been reduced to ruins in their short battle. It's not a good choice to fight you here. Out of the corner of his eyes, Rayleigh saw that Luffy and the others had not yet evacuated, and said in a deep voice. In front of me, you have no right to choose. Zhang Lu grinned grimly. It held a long sword in its right hand and swung it out one after another. The other party is constantly resisting and colliding, shining endless rays of light and stirring endless ripples. The aftermath of their collision grew louder and louder, causing the surrounding pirates and Marine to tremble. Luffy, we have to break through quickly. Otherwise, the aftermath of their war will spread to us. Zoro said solemnly. It is unimaginable that after landing on these many islands, I have encountered such two strong men. Just judging from the movement between them, it makes people tremble. The world's greatest swordsman including Rayleigh. He murmured in his heart. There's no time to hesitate, the two of you. I'll go first. If you stay here any longer, Marine will only have more troops. By then, it will be even more troublesome. Luo said loudly. Zhang Lu, who worried him even more, from Corzone's words, he could figure out how terrifying this guy was. Not at all, they can handle it now. Boom. At this moment, the air waves and gusts of wind roared from behind them again, causing their bodies to stand unsteady. I don't need you, I can solve them alone. Kid said coldly, stepping forward and running away. Ha ha ha, leave it to me. Luffy yelled too. At the same time, looking at the pirates who rushed over, Colonel Marine, who was headed by him, also had his eyes narrowed. He first swept away Zhang Lu and Rayleigh who were fighting not far away, and then stared at Luffy and others. The situation is really complicated. But no matter what, this group of pirates must be dealt with. What a bold move on celestial dragons. Advertisement. With a sharp wave of his right hand, the officer also rushed up. Arrest them. In an instant, the shouts of killing in the arena shook the sky, but the Marines were obviously not the opponents of the three pirate groups. Haha, it seems that Marine is not the opponent of these young juniors. Rayleigh laughed, swiped a knife and touched Zhang Lu before sliding back. Zhang Lu's expression didn't change. Do you want to escape? Rayleigh. He couldn't see the slightest fighting intent in the opponent's shot. Fighting with you here will only get me into endless trouble. I don't want to lose the retirement life that the old man finally got. Rayleigh laughed. He looked back. The Straw Hat Boy and the others had already passed through Marine's encirclement and were fleeing further away. For the time being, they are out of the crisis. The old fellows of the same generation disappeared one by one. If I don't fight you again, I'll die of old age. Zhang Lu sighed, his eyes sharpened. Still as strong as ever, Zhang Lu. Can't a strong young man like you learn to respect the old and love the young, and let us be old? Rayleigh said lightly, clenching the long knife in his right hand. In the next second, both of them flashed, and the long knife in their hands was wrapped in a powerful momentum, piercing the air, and collided with each other. Boom! A huge chasm appeared on the ground, and the trees with a radius of several hundred meters were all cut off at this moment. The Marines lying on the ground were stunned, with deep fear in their expressions. This collision, as long as it is affected, will be cut off in the middle, which is really scary. Isn't it still possible to fight? Rayleigh, if I let go of my hands and feet, it should be a battle that can make my blood boil, right? Zhang Lu grinned, holding the knife in his right hand and pressing down hard towards the front. Rayleigh, also armed with a knife, was fighting him. In the middle of the battle between the two long knives, electric sparks flickered, and there was a deep gap on the ground that seemed to be cut in half. It will be very tiring to fight a monster like you with all your strength. Rayleigh condensed. Its figure flashed suddenly, and it was in front of celestial dragons, who fainted on the ground. Zhang Lu's face was startled, his eyes sharpened. Will this threatening trick really work for me? Rayleigh. Rayleigh smiled faintly, and with a wave of the long knife, the tip of the knife pointed to St. Charles Rose's neck, and a bright red bloodline appeared. Zhang Lu, a guy like you has been hiding for 20 years. Advertisement. Associating what happened before, and still staying in the Marine now, there must be some purpose that can't be known to outsiders. Do you really want to be here, held accountable for a celestial dragons? Then, disrupt your plans. And, after a pause, a flash of light flashed across the lenses of Rayleigh's glasses. You should also read the latest news, right? Next, the big events in the world. You should play a vital role in it, right? Can you really sit back and watch everything happen? Zhang Lu listened quietly, his eyes flickering, his eyes fixed on the 3 celestial dragons lying on the ground at Rayleigh's feet. Before the battle of the top, he really needed to hide. If you beat celestial dragons, the 5 old men in world government will endure it. Because the relationship between the two sides using each other is already very obvious. However, if the celestial dragons were killed or injured, the nature would be different. It also means that the marine, or the world government, will take measures against itself. Of course, the most important thing is that he doesn't want to let go of the marine identity just yet. Sly old fellow, Zhang Lu said lightly, but how many times can you run away from me? Rayleigh laughed, and suddenly lifted his right foot, kicking Charles Rose Saint with one kick. The strong wind whistled, Zhang Lu's eyes narrowed, and he also kicked it to the other side. As for the celestial dragons on the ground, you can decide. Just play with those little guys. I thought there would be a great fight. Such a big event happened. Zhang Lu Admiral. I have to do something too. Gather troops and capture the pirates on the entire island. The culprit is the Straw Hat Boys. We'll see you soon. A large number of Marines gathered around again, and Beyonce was the leader. When he saw Zhang Lu, he walked over with a serious face. Someone has to be to blame. Zhang Lu nodded and said lightly. When he looked up again, Rayleigh was already running wildly, running very fast, leaving only a back figure and disappearing in the blink of an eye. As I said, you can't escape this battle. Beyonce looked at the scene in front of him with sharp eyes. With a slight sigh, Zhang Lu shook his head and turned to leave. Then, he turned and left. However, since I'm here, I won't be disappointed.